What's up, Christian? How you doing?
Hey, I'm good.
Oh man, good to hear. How you?
We're our theists.
I don't know. Hopefully, we have some more joining us. We'll just do an open discussion, a little hangout tonight. So we'll see. See if anybody else joins us. We've sent out a few invites. A couple people may join us in a few minutes. But what you been up to? Tell me something good.
Well, besides recording videos, man, it's not been too much. I mean, that takes up the majority of my time besides working. So I have these next couple days off though. So back on the grind, still doing what I'm doing. This Thursday though on my channel will be the first episode of Secular Fireside. Myself and a couple other atheists having a nice conversation by the fire. So
awesome. Okay, so yeah, you've definitely been busy. I've seen you post a lot of videos. And what's one that people should definitely, if they had to pick one, what's one of the recent ones they should definitely go watch?
Definitely the one that was released yesterday with myself and Rudy B. We had a conversation about their deconversion and their activism. So if you're interested, check that out on my channel. It's youtube.com/Christian J. Watkins.
Awesome. Yeah, man. I said I just got the mood to do a stream tonight. I threw out a few invites, and we'll see if anybody wants to come in and join us. But you know,
oopsies.
See, so yeah. Basically, I've just been working most of the time, but other than that, trying to find time to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely. And I know personally that your schedule is always tough for streaming it at good times. But didn't you have today and yesterday off or something like that?
Yeah, I finally had a full weekend off. I actually had tomorrow off too for the holidays, so that's going to be fun. But yeah, just one of the perks, I guess, of actually being an adult is that you not really a perk, but I guess one of the perks you get is actually looking forward to the weekend. You actually look forward to having more than one day off.
Oh yeah, I definitely have. I'm not working a whole lot right now because I'm starting up a lot of YouTube stuff, but back when I was working 5-6 days a week, I definitely look forward to the weekend. So
yeah, but I didn't have a lot to really discuss. I just kind of wanted to throw it open and see, maybe we'll get some people in. See what happens.
I'm looking in the group chat. It does seem to be the case that everyone's.
Yeah, I kind of probably did a little bit late, but that's I'm going to be the late guy. I probably need to start appealing to people overseas because they're actually probably awake right now. This is probably their afternoon. Mm-hmm. So
I have my my little bit of Mexican food over there that now that I'm on stream, it's going to haunt me for the next hour.
Oh,
as I sit here trying to find ways to sneak bites. So we'll see if the stream can figure out when I take bites.
Feel free to eat on stream. That is not against the rules at all. I'm drinking on stream, so it's fine.
Fair enough. I have some ice water, if that counts.
Oh, it does. It does. Drink what you want to drink.
There we go.
So yeah, I mean, have you come across anything recently that's? I know you were on. You and I were both on the after party last night on Justin's channel.
Oh,
you were on there for a little bit, and then I came in. I think you had already left by the time I came in.
Yeah. I was on there for about an hour and a half, and I started to get a headache from the conversation. Those conversations just aren't my thing.
Yeah. It was interesting. It got a little bit interesting later on too. When of course Richard Madsen came in, it always gets interesting there.
Oh yeah, for sure. He knows his stuff, but
he does. I'm just not sure if it's actual stuff. I don't know if it's I don't know if there's, like I said, I can know hypotheticals, but I don't know if it's actual. And that's we kind of got into that portion of it. Is, it's arguing from, because he points out a different biblical interpretation than most mainstream Christians would have, obviously, and one that I've never come across before at all either. But the discussion seemed to focus around, should we use this as kind of a reductio against other Christians? And I'm like, nah, I don't think that's a good idea either. But Dean's here. Let's bring in Dean. Dean, what's up, buddy?
It's Mr.
What's wrong, guys?
We have a legit apologist on this channel now.
Let's not stretch it too far.
I am a real YouTuber now.
Soon to be Dr. Meadows.
Oh, stop.
Exactly.
Stop.
That's what I'm saying.
Stop.
It's like,
stop. Can we set the bar low so that if I do moderately well, you can say that, hey, Dean did a good job.
Oh, we got Lucas
if you
here
set the
too.
bar too high, I'll never be able
We now
to
have
do it.
two apologists.
Howdy, sirs.
The
Hey,
Geolus is in the house.
Lucas, catalyzing fate.
I just
That is
swallowed a
correct.
single piece of rice.
I'm gonna throw his link up in the chat. Let me get that together. I'm gonna put your link in the chat for anybody that comes
Perfect.
back and watches this. Go check out his channel. I'm already subscribed.
I appreciate it.
Matt,
Oh, it's by the way, it's down here is over that guy, Lucas it's catalyzing faith, and then down here it's the Daily Apologist for Dean Meadows.
Really apologize. I was sitting here trying to think about it. I was about to say I'm gonna throw his link up too. And I had to remember what it
Catalyzing
was.
faith, where he seeks to be a catalyst for your faith.
This is true, so that you can be a
Excellent.
catalyst in the world around you.
Indeed, I was hoping you'd finish.
I bet I'll put Christian on the spot and bet he doesn't know my tagline.
I have no idea what it is.
See,
So I am
I watch-
Christian's favorite.
killing me.
He likes me.
I
more.
watched
Equipping
catalyzing
Christians
faith
to
because
engage
I love
culture,
being angry.
people.
So
You love being angry.
I'm just messing with you.
Culture.
I pissed people off once.
What is atheism?
I didn't catch that one. Which one did you piss people off?
Don't you have
with?
like 1,000 comments on that?
So that one I pretty much just like summarized the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and people just called me an idiot a million times over in the comments.
It's the most effective argument against apologists is to call them idiots.
Right.
very
Apologetics and apologist seems to be a dirty word online.
So just so people are wondering, this is not my like recording and streaming setup normally. The quality is usually much better.
What's sad is that this is mine. So
But you have your green screen on, nothing on the background though.
yeah, I'm like a little too lazy to put it on in the background right now. I may do it when you get into attack mode. But
Oh, good. No, we are laid back here.
Just
We are laid back.
put the Death Star in the background and we'll be good to go.
well, since you asked,
What is it like? I remember I was on Justin's live. Justin has he changes his up, but he has two ladybugs having sex behind him.
oh
I-
yeah,
I never
I've seen
understood
that
that.
one.
That was a.
Who is
I
this?
was like,
All right, hold on.
Is Justin, the empathetic atheist.
I don't think I've met him.
Yeah, it was amazing. He uses it sometimes, but not all the time.
Does that look a little better?
So you have books
looked- yeah, it
behind
looked
you.
fine
Like,
before,
yeah,
but-
both of y'all have
Oh.
books behind you.
Oh
mean,
God. Oh
It's
God. Oh no.
Are you materializing?
This is I am God. Hold on, wait.
Oh my goodness.
There's so many things I could say to you, Christian.
But you will say none of them because you love me.
That's also true.
He will say some of them.
Oh God, this is going to be buggy. I'm just going to turn it off to prevent the bugginess. But there's the Death Star, by the way.
Okay, cool.
So you could have just been lazy like me and gone to Walmart and gotten curtains, or been unlazy like them and gotten actual books and put them behind you.
Yeah, your guys seems a lot cheaper than what I have behind me.
This
This is true.
isn't like my when I sat around and said, what do I want my design to be? I think I'll just put a bunch of books in the background. This is just like, oh, I've got space for books. Okay, I can put them up.
Christian and I did a review of a deflate video, and I think hands down he has the best background. He has this
Yeah.
cool wallpaper, and it's
I really
like
don't like that guy.
What?
he
You
has
don't like
great. He has great wallpaper, though. I'll give him that.
Did you say you don't like that guy?
I don't
Yeah,
like that guy.
I don't know
He's
why.
a classmate of mine from Biola.
I think he's condescending. I don't know.
He's also like, shoot, where's he from?
He I don't know where he's from. He lives
in
in
Lebanon.
yeah, he lives in Lebanon.
But he's from like Switzerland or something.
Belgium.
We don't have to
I
like
think.
each other's friends, Dean. It's fine.
I think it might be
Do
Belgium.
what?
I don't know.
Belgium.
What was
Yeah.
that, Christian?
But anyway,
I said
think
we don't
he's-
have to like
I think
each other's
he's just
friends.
trying to enunciate a lot.
well, his English isn't his first language. He speaks English way better than I speak his language, so I can't really give him any crap on that.
He speaks English better than I speak English. Come
yeah,
on.
really. That's. I probably said the same thing too. Yeah. So we're all here. We got 2 atheists, 2 apologists, 2 Christians. I don't say apologists anymore. 2 Christians. What are the topics that have been on your minds lately?
There are 3 Christians on the show.
There are.
I've really wanted to consider the legitimacy of presuppositional apologetics. I'm just kidding. Yeah, I'm kidding.
Wow.
Sorry, now Joel set a case, and
Well, we-
10 are
we
going to
considered
come
it
for
2
me.
seconds. That's all. The
And I
time
like
it
both of
deserves.
those guys,
Yeah.
by the way.
We considered it for 2 seconds, so we've given it like twice as much time as it deserves. So
Ooh,
I mean,
Ouch.
but
ow.
go ahead. We can talk about it for a second. That's no problem.
I mean, I'm
Absolutely.
not well versed in presuppositional apologetics. I was just making a slight joke, but I'm sure Side 10
The
and
amount of
Joel
restraint I'm
may come
exercising.
across this, and then I don't know that Joel would hunt me down, but I think Side 10 might.
I think
He wouldn't even know how to
I
hunt
will,
you down. You don't even know anything.
I will throw this out there. I think I can understand from a Christian perspective how one can get there. I think it's wrong, but I can understand the consistency of it from someone's perspective. But
Yeah.
I disagree with some of the steps that they're making.
Well, okay. So Lucas, I watched the video you did about agency.
Okay.
To me, it
So hold on.
Yeah.
The video, just so we're clear, that's one of the clips from my discussion with Joel, right? Okay.
right. So I'm getting an echo. Is anybody else hearing that, or is that just me?
I heard it a little bit, but I don't think I
Okay.
hear it now.
Okay. So anyway, to me, it sounds like the argument of agency, it's not too far off from where the precepts are. It is different, but it's essentially we wouldn't be able to do what we do. We wouldn't be able to have these capabilities without God existing.
Yeah, so that isn't presuppositionalism because it doesn't claim that God is a necessary precondition of the world, right? It just says that the world is in a level of incoherency without the introduction of a God, which I think is different because one of those is not necessarily charitable. Like one of them says, God does exist and you can't even engage with this conversation until you accept that fact. And the other one is, reality is best explained through the explanation of God, which I think is not necessarily precept. I mean, I'd still take issues with it, but
I don't think I don't think it is precept. I let's look at it as it seems precept adjacent, somewhat, because it's,
And I won't deny that exactly. I think there's something to that, and that's where I think I agree with the presuppositionalist in the point that you really don't have a way to ground your process of rationality, your process of reasoning.
what does grounding mean, out of curiosity?
You don't have a way to terminate an infinite regress.
Oh, so grounding isn't like an explanation. Grounding is removing inconsistencies,
Right.
like removing a regress.
Well, it's an explanatory regress. So if you want to explain how you have a process of rationality, you need personal agency.
So what regress are you referring to when you say that a model absent a God is first entitled to a regress? Hey, Aaron, is A entitled to a regress, and then B, once that regress occurs, why can myself and John's perspective, not solve for that.
So why can you guys not provide a basis for
what is it, and then why
agency?
can't we solve for it?
Okay, so I'm not exactly tracking with the question 100%. So, maybe can you just repeat it a little bit?
Yeah. So you said that there's a regress. Is that an agency based regress that you're talking about?
Well, it's just an explanatory regress. So if you want to ask where something comes from, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to explain some sort of attribute of reality, and you need to go to some other layer beyond it to explain that thing, where that thing comes from. And agency is something that is unique from what you see in just normal physical matter.
Okay.
Right. So you need to explain how agency arises, how we have agency. And the claim that I was making was in the interview was.
Sorry, I'll let you go ahead and finish. I don't want to interrupt or anything like that.
Yeah. So the point that I was making was that agency is when you want to say you get agency from just physical matter, you end up with, you're effectively saying you are going to get a blue wall by just rearranging a bunch of red bricks. That's kind of the analogy I use to get the picture of when someone says that agency, if you want agency at all, you need to have agency as part of the foundation of reality, because it does not appear to be something that can come from just rearranging matter. There's nothing we can do to a pile of rocks. There's nothing we can do to a set of electrons, a set of atoms, and all of a sudden you add one more component to the mix and poof, there's personal agency there. It seems as though personal agency is completely absent of just mere matter, and no matter how we rearrange them, we're not going to get the property of agency from that. So just like no matter how we rearrange a bunch of red bricks, we will never get a blue wall. That's sort of the way I was trying to describe it. And I'll admit this isn't like a strictly rigorous argument I'm providing. It's more just a concept for understanding.
Okay, so when we're conceptualizing the distinction between life and what becomes agency, would you agree that agency is contingent upon life? That something has to be living in order for agency to occur? Okay. So because agency is an offshoot of life, would you say that there's anything about agency that's fundamental to life? Or would you say it's contingent upon? Just I want to make very clear, because it's gonna be really important in the next part of the answer.
I guess I don't understand the question.
So is agency something that can exist unless independent of something already being alive?
Define alive. Are you talking about like biological life or?
Yeah, biological life. Just that general.
So
sphere.
I would say you don't need biological life.
Okay.
See, I have a problem with the analogy just because you've kind of chosen red and blue as, one or the other. I don't see those two things as agency and physical matter as definitely being separate, because we're physical also. So the fact that we can't rearrange things and make agency, we can't do that with a lot of things. Like we can't rearrange things and make something that's hungry. We can't rearrange things and do a lot of things. We can't make a lot of things.
What was that you said? Rearrange things and mix them in what?
Makes them hungry or something like that. I mean,
I would also say the experience of being hungry is a first person experience that occurs in the mind and is not strictly a physical thing. But
would agency require mind also?
Yeah, agency would require a mind. Okay,
so we have like single cell organisms, right, that react to their environment. They, if you put something, if it sits in some kind of quote unquote danger, it will move. Now, I don't think you probably wouldn't say these things have minds.
So I'm undecided on the extent to which you can get some sort of mind or soul in more simple organisms. So some people would actually argue that, like, down to the level of plants and single cell organisms, there's something resembling a soul or a certain type of soul. I'm very undecided on how far I would take that. And I don't know the answer to that question. I don't think you can discern strictly from scientifically testing whether that is a conscious decision or whether that is simply a physical reaction.
So
well, I mean, but even humans who you would say do have this agency, we have physical reactions. With, not conscious decision. We react without conscious decisions to some things.
Sometimes, but we also
Dean,
make
you're
conscious
muted.
decisions.
Right, we do both, but
I think what Lucas is trying to describe here is there's a difference between, like you said, in the single cell organism passively interacting with reality, and then from a first person perspective actively
and that's where I
engaging
was
with
trying to go,
reality.
Dean. I appreciate you making that distinction, because
Thank you, Dean.
the reason why I was asking if something about agency was contingent upon life was to try to move to the point that I'm wondering how much explanatory power we can get from the axiomatic God principle that would help us explain the bridge between organic life and agency. And I'm wondering how we can build that bridge together to make a more sound and cogent explanation in reality using God.
So I guess I'm struggling to see what you're saying. So you're saying, I'm actually just struggling to follow you on that.
So perhaps I'm being very, very unclear. So we have a set of organisms that we would say set A doesn't experience agency and set B does experience agency. And by experience, I just mean has. So when we have a set of organisms that do have agency, a set of organisms that don't have agency, and we're trying to bridge the gap between how an organism can go from having no agency to having agency, going from red to blue in your analogy, how can we introduce God as an axiom in our worldview to help us explain A to B?
So I'll take a stab at it. I
Sure.
think when you look at I think you could look at metaphysics, and you can look at I don't necessarily know that I would say it's properties, but probably substances. And if God exists, and we're talking about this agency that is in some organisms, namely Homo sapiens, human beings, and that it doesn't exist in, like what John said, the single celled organism, then I think God would be, I think if we are not just, I think if monism is false and substance dualism is true, then that at least brings the proposition and the God claim into view.
So what part of the attributes of dualism helps us explain going from red to blue, or going from a lack of agency to agency? Is it that the God being the ultimate agent, transferring agency unto those who would not normally have it? Is that the explanatory power, or is the explanatory power in a different sphere?
So the argument that I was making was that, and this is just something that John disagrees with. I think is what it fundamentally comes down to, is John disagrees with this point, but that if agency is the type of thing where if we want to have it, it needs to be part of the building blocks of reality. So the fundamental nature of reality itself needs to have agency if we want agency to be part of the reality we experience. So that was where I was getting with the red bricks to blue wall analogy, was that agency is understood as the type of thing that if we want to have it in our reality, then it needs to be part of the foundation of reality. So that means the foundation of the foundation of reality would need to be a personal agent, and that's where we get some sort of transcendent being.
So that's interesting, right? Because I have a conceptualization of agency where, and I'm following you totally on the problem between no agency becoming agency through insert chemical process here, through naturalism. I'm following you on the issues with that. I'm definitely following you. What I want to know is, So we're citing to God's attributes. We're citing that God is a personal, transcendent being. And I'm wondering how we get from God has XYZ attributes to that is a sufficient explanatory power of reality and how other organisms have that attribute. Because I could say, for example, there is X thing that exists that has XYZ attributes, and that would be the explanatory power for the attributes in the organism. Is there something unique about the Christian explanation that makes these attributes particularly useful in this explanation?
So
I don't think anything I said was particular to the Christian faith, provided there was a personal God.
Well,
That's where I think I was taking it. Now maybe someone else might think they could take it somewhere else, but to the extent that I was going with the argument, that's where I was taking it. That just some personal God exists.
So it's like personal God, and if it's a personal God, then it's probably the Christian God kind of thing. Like it's that stepping ladder.
It would be personal God, and then based upon our construct of that personal God, how are we paring it down to the personal gods that are claimed to exist? So I think that's where Lucas is going there.
Well, so I think Dean, you're talking about like a two-step process, and that's sort of the difference between what you would talk about with us dirty apologists as the classical versus evidential apologists. As classical models sort of take a two-step process of establishing that there's some sort of God out there, and then once that has been established as actual or at least reasonable or plausible, then arguing from there to the particular Christian God, whereas an evidential apologist would go straight from pretty much step one to just go, hey, Christianity is true. And my approach is generally along the classical approach to say, first, let's talk about a God, because I think the biggest hurdle is, hey, how do I know there's a God that exists that can help make sense of some of these things that you say are true about the Christian faith? So I'm going to start with a general God, and then we're going to do some sort of conceptual analysis of, well, what does this God have to, what properties does this God have to have? And then we can start talking about, okay, if God exists, what religious positions make most sense? And we can look at the particular information around the Christian faith, whether it's history of the resurrection or certain miracle accounts or whatever you want to go, wherever you want to go with it. Then we can have that conversation. It's a much longer process, but I think it makes more sense in the long run.
Do you mind if I bring in Aaron for a little bit? I don't want to let Aaron sit on the sidelines for too much longer.
I was actually about to do that myself, so please do.
Aaron's been known to be the talkative member at the Daily Apology.
Welcome, Aaron. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, Dean, I got the invite from Dean, so didn't really know what I was stepping into, but happy to be here.
Glad to have you.
So do you have any thoughts on either the approach that we just talked about or the previous conversation on agency?
Yes, I was trying to kind of pick up the pieces of the conversation on agency. It sounded like maybe Lucas had suggested an argument for God's existence.
He has a video that
or
he
you guys were just talking about the mind
clip of his discussion he had about agency requiring God. I'm going to throw that in the chat also, and I'm going to go back and put it in the description when all this is over.
I could be wrong, but I think the argument that he was making is that a worldview absent a God couldn't sufficiently explain the idea that agency exists in organisms.
Yeah, I think that's correct, Christian.
Gotcha.
That's the right picture. It was part of I did a full hour plus interview on a different podcast, the Think podcast with Joel Sedekase, and this was a clip that I took out of that specifically addressed agency.
Awesome.
Gotcha. Okay. And then to the second, like the approach that you're talking about, as opposed, so on the one hand, trying to jump right to the Christian God, on the other hand, trying to more incremental process. I would fall more on that incremental process, I think, to lay a foundation where you're making progress. Okay, so move away from maybe materialism generally conceived to more of that, get into theism, and then once you've got theism, then you can start to narrow down your options. So that would be my approach.
You can use the Meadows razor for that.
See, my only
I like it.
we go back to the agency thing real quick, because my only one of my objections, I guess, I have with it is what seems to be happening is we seem to be placing a lot of specialness on agency. This seems to be like, well, this is a really cool thing, and I don't know why we don't apply the same to just non-agency. Because we could easily say we wouldn't see anything with non-agency, or we would need something, the fundamental aspect of reality, to be non-agent in order to have non-agency. But because we think agency is so special, because we think that minds are amazing, and we don't fully understand them, it seems that we're just kind of saying, hey, look at this cool thing. I don't see how this could happen without an agent being behind it all.
So I think that's where, did you ever click the link to watch the full interview?
I haven't done that yet, no.
Okay, so the interview itself, we were discussing this general argument from science where I talked about how if we want to have something, if we want to have science as what I would call a truth tracking endeavor, or I might have used the word truth seeking endeavor in that discussion, there are a couple of things that we need to be true about reality. And one of those things was that there needs to exist personal agents who are capable of engaging in a legitimate process of deliberation. So engaging in some process of rationality. And so what that does is the argument seeks to eliminate any sort of blind or strict materialism, whereby there is no real agent behind our thoughts, that our thoughts are really just matter and materialism just interacting, and that we are not really personal agents. So it eliminates, what I would say eliminates determinism of any sort, and it eliminates a non-agent reality if we want science to be a truth-seeking endeavor. And that's a much larger argument, and this was just one piece of that argument.
Sure, I don't think we could have a truth. Like you say, you did correct it, said truth seeking. I would say that is more probably what I would call science, because people like to throw around the word truth and like to say, oh, we're trying to discover what's true. I don't even know that we have that capability. I don't even know that we have access to objective knowledge per se at all.
I don't. Maybe my understanding of science is off. I feel as though science takes observable facts in the world and then tries to make theories and models that best fit the set of facts.
Well, observable still requires a subjective component.
Sure.
So that's why I say I don't think we have anything to access anything that's purely objective.
Now, what do you mean when you say it require? What do you mean by subjective component? What do you mean?
Anything observed requires an observer.
Okay.
That observer will always be a subjective component.
So you don't think that two subjects could observe reality the same way?
I don't know how we would show
that be demonstrated as a fact.
I think we could show that they're very close. I don't know how we'd ever show that they're exactly the same.
Novel testable predictions is how you do that.
Well, we could, like I said, we could get there. We could show that it's very close.
Hear you, Lucas?
I said thank you. Novel predictions.
Right. But I don't know that we could ever get to these two are experiencing the exact same thing. We could get to them experiencing something very close. They seem to be anyway.
Can I just play the dummy in the room real quick?
Oh, that's my job.
I am the dummy in the room.
So
wait. The MA philosophy or MPhil student, is that an MPhil?
Dean always kills me with this. This man's going for a PhD
because I'm the dummy in the room.
You are the most educated among us, right? That
doesn't
true?
mean I'm not stupid. Okay. So
hey, welcome, Larry.
Straight. If I'm following John correctly, like thought experiment. So if we were in the Serengeti and two male lions attacked us simultaneously, and there were two other people on the outside of that attack, and they saw that, you and I wouldn't be experiencing a lion attack simultaneously.
Well,
and two people wouldn't observe that simultaneously and say, they're being attacked by lions.
Right, but just the fact that a mind, because I use subjective meaning, it depends on a mind. Objective meaning we could remove all minds and it would still be true.
So the introduction of
So-
a mind makes it subjective and not objective?
The introduction of a mind perceiving the perception is still subjective.
Well, here, can I take a crack at this, Dean?
Hold on. I would love to answer this, but I gotta step
I
out for a
don't
second,
know
so I'm
if
just
I'm
gonna
off
stop my
base or
camera
not.
and mic right now,
So-
and then I'll be back.
Sounds good, Lucas.
Hey,
don't
John,
know
if I might try to offer maybe an example to help understand what you're saying.
Sure.
So maybe you could think of it, instead of us looking at it with eyeballs, you could imagine that people just had cameras for heads. So we would all be observing the exact same phenomenon. But I think your observation is to say, how do we know that the hardware you've got in your camera is producing the same image that my hardware in my camera is producing? Maybe I've got a crappy camera and it's blurry and yours is high def. So we're
Right,
observing
so-
the same thing, but our observations could be different. Is that what you're talking
Well,
about?
basically, there's something objectively true happening. That's
Okay.
not.
This is where
Beautiful.
novel predictions come in, right? Because if we're experiencing the same reality, we should be able to make predictions that are consistent over time. And that's why we
Right.
would say, am I being attacked by a lion? All right. Can someone else confirm that that actually happened? Can somebody else confirm that that's actually happening? Can somebody else interact with the wounds? Things like these.
Well-
These are novel predictions that we can make based off of what happens when we're sharing the same reality.
That's why I had the two people on the outside.
Right, but what I would say is,
Throwing that out there.
like, there is objectively something happening. There is something being experienced. The experience, I'm saying, like, this probably goes to better to, I'm saying that I don't think we have access to objective knowledge, because the knowledge will always
Is
have
that
its objective-
objectively true?
I don't think it is.
Well, then why did you say it?
Because I'm saying it from a subjective viewpoint anyway.
Yeah, but I don't know. I like John, love you to death. I don't think that makes any sense. Like, if we don't have access to objective knowledge, then that statement is self-refuting inherently.
Why would
It
it be?
seems circular.
Because if we don't have access to objective knowledge, then you just made a statement that must be subjective, and therefore you could say the same thing but reverse it, and there'd be no difference, right? Because like you're not using an objective standard, so it could just be whatever the hell you want it to be, right? So I don't think that's like
It's my interpretation of because if anything, if you want to have knowledge, I'm saying that you have to have three components. We go with justified true belief.
Right.
okay.
So the thing that's happening,
Anyone going to bring up Gettier?
Can we not, please? That's just going to be brutal.
Okay, sorry, I had to be that guy.
Had to be.
Leave your blood magic out of this, Lucas.
I'll be right back.
That's what I'm saying. You could say it like, I believe the cup is sitting on the table. There's actually a cup sitting on the table, or there's not.
But if there's no access to objective knowledge, then why would I believe statements be anything more than just, screw it, right?
I tend to think every claim is I believe.
Well, that's fine, right? But if we're saying, if we can't access objective knowledge, which, I think uttering that in and of itself is a contradiction, but it's fine, right? If we can't access objective knowledge, then when we say things like,
well, I don't think we can. I don't think we can. We may be able to. That's the thing. We may be able to. I don't think we're justified in saying we can, though, because we're always going to have that subjective component.
so you're saying that you don't think we can attain objective knowledge, but is that statement itself objective knowledge?
It's my belief.
I think what John is saying is that we have, in theory, we have the ability to have objective knowledge. There would just be no way for us to know that we had objective knowledge.
And if objective means certainty, then I don't think it's a particularly useful definition. To me, objective means without any more reasonable doubt, to where all other doubts are either not reasonable or not founded by any evidence or not founded by any reasonability.
Christian, that's your definition of objective, you said?
Yeah, generally when we're talking about these sorts of things.
Are you sure you're not just describing like a reasonable belief?
Yeah,
If I am, then we can use that instead.
Yeah, it seems to me that objective would be independent of any kind of certainty that we could attain. So objective, right? So like there's a universe that exists objectively, even though we have no certainty with respect to its existence.
Well, if I claim to have objective knowledge, to me that would equate to certainty.
Well, I think you could have knowledge of something that is objective. But I think to speak of objective knowledge might not be exactly tracking with.
I
the
don't think
language here.
objective is the right term to apply to knowledge.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So knowledge is about epistemology. It's an epistemic thing, and I think objectivity deals with the more metaphysics side of it.
or
You're
just the
talking about
ontological status of it.
the ontology of what actually exists, independent of what we know and or believe about it. So to talk about objective knowledge, I just kind of think is mixing apples and oranges a bit.
Okay. Well, that's why, like I said, I tend to use like objective knowledge and interchangeably with certainty or absolute knowledge, something like that.
Yeah, and so maybe I missed this when I stepped out, but I would use the term Cartesian certainty. I think is the general philosophical term for that.
Who is that?
Yeah.
Rene Descartes,
I'm joking.
Mister. You know, you better not let your graduate program see this with you making comments like that.
Okay. I can't.
Give an F the first day.
You guys kill me with that stuff.
I'm proud to be your friend, Dean. Okay, I am proud of you. That's why I make these comments.
Okay. Anyways, enough about me and whatever I got going on. LTC, what's up?
Living the dream, brother.
Is that a stormtrooper in the background?
That is definitely a stormtrooper. So that's me walking around at Disney World while the stormtroopers were on parade, and I caught a selfie with one because, well, stormtroopers are quite possibly one of my favorite fictional characters.
I'd love to go through their qualifying course with the little laser gun there. Doesn't seem like you need a high score to pass.
No, I'm pretty sure that my 9-year-old son could qualify in marksmanship for stormtrooper.
And that's the thing. If Star Wars would have just had the training regiment of Marines on the dark side, none of those characters would have survived. I'm just saying.
Yeah,
I think
it would have been
someone
bad
here a
news
Marine,
for the
Dean?
rebellion for sure.
Was someone on this call Marine?
I didn't say whether someone was or wasn't. I'm just, noting what I know about Marines from history.
Just jotting down on my piece of paper the amount of times Dean mentions he's a Marine.
Hey, Christian.
Just had to add an extra line there.
I do think the coolest thing.
Christian, I can make the one comment about you that you love so much, but I won't.
That I'm 18?
Yeah.
I did it for you.
I'm not going to do it
Thank
because
you.
I respect you.
Yeah, I get it. I'm a
your
little
ages
baby. I
question,
shouldn't
though.
be having these conversations talking about.
So John was trying to say something, I think, and
that's
we've
fine.
just totally taken over his stream.
No, please.
Oh, go ahead, John.
Anything y'all have to say is going to be better than what I could say. No,
One of the things, so I joined the conversation late, and I apologize. Thank you for having me on, by the way. I really appreciate it. Just based on what little bit I do know about street epistemology, that conversation was over like 5 minutes ago, because as soon as I don't know enters the building, the conversation's pretty much over with.
I'm sorry.
I'm fine with I don't know. You can always build on that.
I want to keep my career. Okay.
I'm perfectly okay with I don't know as well. I think I'm the one who said it, wasn't I?
I don't know if I'm okay with that.
I do know that I'm okay with that. I think I objectively know that. I'm
Nice.
okay with
As Aaron said that, I was like, my mind like red flagged everywhere, and I was like, oh, it was a joke. And then
that. You went on the defensive immediately.
Warning. Warning.
So that's
warning.
the problem with when you become one of these weird internet, YouTube atheists and or Christians. We all kind of lose a sense of humor at a certain point, and everything's a battle. So
Well, it's only that way too, because like if you get a mix in the room, now it's like you kind of got to watch. Like you're side eyeing everybody constantly.
I've been looking at Dean this whole time, but it's not for that reason.
we know why.
I just try and bring a little dry sarcasm to the mix.
With the youth of these Gen Zers, I tell you what, They think they run this place.
I tell you what, back in my day,
Just say okay, boomer. That's right. That's what you gotta do.
I could bench press my entire Marine Corps back in my day.
If I ever see you in public, I'm going to drop you. I promise you that.
That's so good.
I'm kidding. I'm not gonna drop you.
I do have to say that the stormtrooper
Wait.
thing. I'll go back to the stormtrooper because now I think I think what Disney World did now is give everybody a new goal as far as careers in life, because they make them go through like training to be a Star Wars character, and just the training alone would be fun.
Stormtroopers in Disney World has got to be the coolest job on the planet, other than the fact that you're baking inside of that costume, because it is your job to just be a dick to everyone constantly.
That's already my job, buddy.
You don't get paid for that.
Oh, true.
I do want to return to
restaurant
Christian's
where the waiters do
question
that here.
about agency.
We can go back to that.
Could you run it by everybody who's new to the conversation?
Yes, please.
Oh,
Namely
yeah.
Larry.
Yeah. So the question was if set A are the list of things that don't have agency, and set B are the list of things that do include agency, how does introducing God make the leap from set A to set B either more reasonable or give it more explanatory power?
So in order to have a set B, is you need something that has agency in order to have agency in set B, right?
How
Whatever
did that
exists.
thing get agency though?
Okay. Whatever exists, whatever it is that exists, has to get something from the foundation of reality. Whatever is the most fundamental thing of reality is the basis for everything that exists in reality. So,
But hold on, right? Do you agree with the statement that in order for something to have agency, it must get agency from something else? Or do you want to say only for things that aren't the qualifying factors of the God that you're going to propose? Because those are two, they're slightly different, but one of them would be, I think, inconsistent. The other one would be potentially consistent with your worldview.
So off the top of my head,
are we wholesale
I think,
dismissing a creation model?
No.
Are we wholesale dismissing a creation model where set A was created without agency and set B was created with agency? Like, I'm just asking.
So I don't think we're dismissing that. I think we're just having a conversation. So everything's on the table right now. But my off the cuff response is, I think we're talking about if you have something that exists contingently, it needs to get its properties from something else. Whereas if something, well, yeah, I mean, I would argue to avoid an infinite regress, you need to have something that exists necessarily. So,
well, there's a great argument. I kind of remember it, but there was something that Alex Malpass pointed out about the contingency argument and about how, avoiding the infinite regress. He agrees that you have to avoid the infinite regress at some point. There has to be it has to terminate at some point. So you would agree that it's contingent or necessary. It can't be anything else.
yes.
If it's not contingent or necessary, it doesn't exist, I don't think.
Okay, so let me see if I had some notes about it, but basically he says, okay, so if it's necessary, then everything that follows is also necessary. Like if you have a necessary being, let's say God is necessary, then either, let's say there's two possibilities for creation. That God made the decision, he did it willingly, or that it was that the creation was necessary also, as in it wasn't done volitionally.
Really quickly, John.
Yeah.
Would you agree that a foundation is necessary for a house to be built?
Not if it's on sand.
Yeah, the house can be built without a foundation.
Okay.
A good house, not a good house.
Nobody got it. Nobody got it.
I got you,
Except for
Dean.
Aaron.
I got it,
Aaron
Dean.
knows
I tracked with
didn't
you.
laugh.
So is there anything about a house that you think is necessary for a house to be a house?
I would think everything that goes into a house is contingent on something else.
That's fine, but that wasn't really the question. though.
I want to know where you're going with this because I think this is taking us really off track of the question that John was asking.
No, the reason why it's relevant is I was going to say you can create contingent things, or you can create, well, I mean, whatever, right? You can create contingent things. I saw Dean smile and I wanted to catch myself, but it doesn't matter because I'm already here, right? You can have necessary things that therefore within those things are not necessary. Like you can have a house where the foundation is necessary, but have like a lamp that isn't necessary. It's contingent, right? So I was trying to make the case that necessity doesn't necessarily follow necessarily into another necessity. Like you can have something that's necessarily there, and part of that necessity whole can be things that are contingent upon the necessity.
Well, that's what I was getting. That's kind of what I was
you're
getting
saying
into.
is what I think you're saying. I think you're right. But I think that's a little bit different than the question you're asking, John. I don't know. Maybe they're related. But what I took away is basically if you have some necessary cause, then the effect itself is also necessary. Is where
Right,
I
it could, right,
where I
it
was
could
going
not
with
have,
that.
right. Well, it could not have been any other way.
And I think that is part of one of the great responses to why some sort of physical causation isn't or natural causation or impersonal causation model is insufficient as an answer to this question, because all of those are such that where you have the conditions sufficient for the effect present, therefore the effect itself should be present. Whereas when you invoke personal agency, if God as the fundamental nature of reality is a personal agent, then you have a mechanism by which to have some sort of free will or something like that, where there's no necessity of the decisions made, or there's no necessity of the actions taken. Those actions are caused by the agent itself. So I guess in my response to that objection, as you formulated it, I would say that this it doesn't object to the contingency argument. It just demonstrates that the concept of this explanation that you get from the contingency argument is a personal agent rather than anything impersonal.
I would say that my point was you could say that this agent, if you said it, so it either made a choice that was necessary, or it made a choice which makes it a contingent thing, or the string of events that followed this being existing, this necessary being, are also necessary.
So provided that this agent can make choices, then I think you would say that anything that follows from those choices exists contingently upon those choices.
Right. If it made a choice, that would mean that these things are contingent.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
so.
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm kind of looking at my notes at the same time, but
Was this like a video that you watched or something?
no, it was a discussion. It was something he had said. I tried to take notes during it, but he brought up some great points about how contingency versus necessity. I don't want to butcher it too bad, but that's one of the questions I had. I'm not going to try to repeat what he said, but that's
yeah,
one of the
I'm
things I
just
wanted
wondering
to.
if you had like a link to that discussion.
I'll find it. I can throw it in there.
I haven't seen a whole ton of Malpass, but I've really enjoyed the discussions I've seen him in. So, I would like to see whatever it is you're talking about.
Basically, his thing boiled down to we're always left with some event with no explanation, regardless of whether we inserted God or not.
So I don't know if I buy that.
It seems.
Well, we get to a God that chose to make this world. Then why did he make this world, not some other world? We don't really have an explanation for that.
So
we may not. I think we need to differentiate between we don't have a particular explanation or an explanation for a particular thing versus we don't have an explanation or a general mode of explanation.
I'd also like to add on to what Lucas said. I think there's a distinction between explanations that are necessary and explanations that aren't necessary. Like I would say that, for example, if your goal is to ride a bike, is it a necessary explanation to know how rubber is made? Is it a necessary explanation? Perhaps not if your goal is to ride a bike. But if your goal is to remake the bike or to investigate how the bike was made, perhaps it is relevant to know how the rubber is made or how the wood is put together or the metal is put together for the bike. So I would say that there's different methods or different end goals necessitate more or less explanations to a sufficient explanation.
Right, but if we're talking about the fundamental nature of reality, then we're going to get to a point with no explanation.
I haven't heard the argument, so I wouldn't be able to agree or disagree with you.
That's my point. Is even if we do accept that it was a god, we still get to a point with no explanation.
My contention with that is I would say appeals to necessity are like an appeal to necessity is an explanation. An appeal to contingent upon something external to whatever it is. So you could explain the contingent facets of reality based on the agency of a necessary being.
It seems like John's point is that whether you get back that far or not, so let's say that God exists and he had no choice, well, then existence is all necessary, right? We still don't have, so that's a necessary stream. But then if we say, no, God didn't have to create he made a choice, well, then we push it back one further and say, okay, so then what caused that choice? What's the explanation for that choice?
Exactly.
And it seems like John's saying that once you push it back to that question, what caused God to make the choice? What's the explanation for that choice? Then we're left with the same thing. There is no explanation. He just made the choice. Is that the direction you're taking?
So yeah. So if he made the choice, the choice would be contingent. Like the result of the choice would be contingent. So what exactly? But why did he make that choice and not some other choice? So then we'd have to go. What was the cause of him making that choice? That would be the necessary component.
Right. So I think maybe it might actually be a mistake to ask that kind of question, because when we're talking about choices, at least in terms of free will, the definition of a choice is something that is uncaused, right? Because if it's caused, then it's not a choice anymore. So if something is a choice, if a free choice, truly a free choice, then that doesn't have a cause that necessitated it. It's just the individual making the choice for reasons, right? So God could have a reason. So let's think about it in terms of our own experience. So if we're thinking about our own free will, right? And our ability to make a choice.
Really quickly, Aaron,
Yeah.
do you think that humans have free will?
I do.
I knew that was coming. I knew that was coming down the pipe.
Well, the reason why I ask,
whole
and I think
stream's
you know
screwed
the
now.
reason why I ask is because if free will is uncaused, and we agree that God is the only uncaused cause, then I would take an issue with the idea that human beings could exercise something that seems fundamental to only God.
Oh yeah,
So-
actually, I agree with that characterization. Humans are able to exercise something that is characteristic of God, namely the ability to make free choices. But I think there's an important distinction that needs to be made between events and things. So there can be certain uncaused events, and I would argue that our choices are uncaused events, but that things wouldn't just be able to pop into existence uncaused from nothing. So I would make a distinction between events and things in that respect.
Are thoughts things?
That's a good question.
Because if thoughts are things and they can't pop into existence, then that would suggest that our free will, at least as far as thoughts go, couldn't be uncaused.
Yeah, I'd have to think about the semantics of that in terms of them being things. So I'm thinking, well, maybe thoughts could just be events that happen
And
as
perhaps
opposed
I'm
to
just being
actual things.
pedantic, but I think there's perhaps something there
You're not being
So-
pedantic. I think that's a very astute question.
So, Christian, my question, my rebuttal question then to that would be, where do you stand on the image of God and the fall of humanity?
Is there any more specificity you can bring to the question?
Sure. So,
I do too.
if human beings are created in the image of God, and the image of God is something that all of humanity bears, and God, as we define it, is immaterial, timeless, spaceless, powerful, and personal. So
Mhm.
there's not a physical image that we're created in. There must be something else, some other image that we are created in. And if we're imaged after an uncaused cause, and were created in perfect harmony with said God, and a choice broke that perfect harmony, also known as the fall of humanity, then wouldn't that be the exercise of free will that was granted inherently in the image of God that we were created in?
Yeah, so I think if something is granted, it ceases being free will. Like that no longer falls under the definition of an uncaused action. Because if the conditions for that action were fundamentally caused by something else, like the creation by God, or if it was fundamentally caused by receiving attributes of God's nature, for example, not receiving attributes like timeless or not receiving attributes like transcendent, but perhaps you do receive attributes like the ability to exercise uncaused events, as Aaron puts it, as opposed to uncaused things. I would say that that is a particularly potent response against what you're saying, which is that if the fall was a free choice, it would need to be uncaused. And I think we would all agree here that the fall wasn't uncaused, that there was certain conditions that were in place that led to the fall being not an exercisation of an uncaused, but an exercisation of prior existing conditions, that in the absence of those conditions, the fall wouldn't make sense within the context of the scripture.
So I would just argue back that that God is faithful to complete a good work in you until the day of Christ, in that sense, all of the rest of the attributes that you say that we weren't given at the time that we were created, we actually do get, because we will be timeless, eternal. We will be spaceless in heaven. All of those things.
Well, that's fine. That's a fair point, Larry. That's a fair point at the end there. That's totally fair, and it's consistent, I think, with the idea that you're talking about. I was bringing up the issue with the fall because that was the question. But if you mean, when it happens to be the case that those attributes are returned back to us, then I would say that that could be an exercisation of the continuation or bringing back in of those attributes that fundamentally didn't exist when creation or sans creation, and then eventually you have human beings and things like that. So I would say, but what I'm really interested in is if Aaron, Lucas, Larry, or Dean have a proper sort of any thoughts on the conceptualization that the fall could not have been uncaused, therefore could not have been free will.
So I'm going to, okay. I take issue with the notion that free choices are uncaused. I think I think we need to make a distinction between caused versus determined. So when we talk about free will, free choices, free will is not so much something being uncaused as it is not determined by forces outside of the agent itself. That doesn't mean it's not impacted by forces outside of the agent, or there's a better word there than forces, but I can't think of it off the top of my head. But so I think there is such a thing as just agent causation. That is a type of causation that we have, and that is from ourselves, that we can choose to do certain things. Now, that what the choices we make have to be consistent with whatever our nature is. Similar, like I can jump whenever I want, I can jump, but I cannot jump over a house because it is not within my nature to jump over a house. There are certain things that may not be within our natures to choose, but that doesn't mean we cannot make choices among the things that are within our nature to choose. So
Are our natures determined?
So even if our natures were determined, that would not eliminate the freedom of the will when it comes to agent causation, because
No, I
nature,
potentially agree with you. I potentially agree with you there. My point with natures being determined is that, and I think that perhaps Aaron is coming around to the fact that perhaps we want to use some other language besides uncaused, because it seems to get messy with the conceptualization of what we know and what we try to claim about God specifically. But if we're saying that there can be a set of circumstances in which an action occurs that can be impacted in the action, but not actually compel a choice, I would ask this question. If you're in a set of circumstances, like for example, either eat food or starve, and the circumstances of that situation leave it in such a way to where to not choose to eat would be to fundamentally stop existing, right? Or at least from a naturalistic model. I understand that you don't actually believe that's what happens, but under a naturalistic model, if the only other alternative is to stop existing, then would we say that that's an exercisation of the free will that Lucas was just talking about? And if so, then how do we know what acts are actually causally determined and what acts are perhaps set up and then free will is kind of put up like a volleyball?
Can I throw out an illustration of the way that I understand this? Maybe.
Sure, go ahead, Larry.
So yesterday, I had decided in advance that I was going to take my son out for ice cream after dinner tonight. I talked with my wife. We decided that I could have the time one-on-one with my son. All of the arrangements were made. There was gas in the car. There was money in the bank account to pay for the ice cream. I called ahead because we live in a COVID world, and I had made a reservation so that we had a table to sit at and that we were able to enter the building. All of these things were predetermined. But because I love my son and because I want him to know that his input is valid and that he has a choice in the things that we do together as father and son at the dinner table tonight, I asked him, I said, hey, after dinner, let's do something. We can either make popcorn together, which is his favorite thing in the whole world to do in the house, on the stove, hear the popcorn kernels popping inside of the metal pot, and really enjoys being in the stove and in the kitchen with dad. Like, that's a big deal for him. Or we can go out for ice cream. Now, I know that 100 times out of 100, my son is going to choose to go out for ice cream with me. But me presenting that option to him does not in any way impact his freedom to choose one or the other.
So I appreciate the illustration, and I think that it sets up really good for the next question, which is, how do we know when something ceases to be determined and starts becoming a choice?
That's one of the issues, I think. Because it does feel like we always had the option. Whatever choice we make, it feels like we could have done otherwise. I don't know how you get around feeling that way versus showing that was the case. I don't know how you tell the difference.
So I think that it.
Well, okay, showing that it was that way, I think is more of a question of how would I prove to somebody else that it was that way, as opposed to how do I myself know that it was that way.
To you, it feels.
So I don't know if that's what you meant to say.
Well, to everyone, it feels like we could have done different.
So I would say the most fundamental thing we know, the if we can know anything at all, the closest thing we have is our first person experience. The things that we experience first person, we have more reason to believe than anything else. Because everything else we only have access to via our first person experiences. So what our first person experiences tell us is, I think that's a good starting point, a fair starting point. We can trust it, and it's not infallible, but it is our best. It's our only access to any sort of knowledge.
But aren't we always looking at that? Aren't we always looking at our choices via hindsight?
I don't
No,
think so.
I
don't
mean,
think we're
I'm-
looking at
It depends
choices
on
via
which
hindsight.
conceptualization you have.
I'm in the process of considering a number of choices on a number of things right now that are yet to come.
And this is why I tell people, like, I even tell my like aggressively deterministic friends, which is that if free will is anything, it's at very least illusory. It is at very least a strong compulsion that we do in fact think we have those.
Oh,
such
I agree. I believe we all feel that we have
So-
free will.
whether or not it is an actual property of the reality of which we're sharing. And I know I just did a big philosophical assumption and said that we're all sharing a reality. I know how absolutely remarkable that I did that.
We'll let you get
in
away
one
with it. It's
sentence.
okay.
But
One step
presuming that
closer,
we're all,
Christian.
I know, right? Presuming that we're all sharing a reality together, and we're trying to determine that what is fundamental to that. And if we're saying free will is or is not, I would say that free will is at very least, it could be more than this. It is at very least illusory in the fact that in all of which we can experience, it does in fact seem to be the case that we can exercise agency over individual choices. Now, the conditions of that agency may in fact be outside of our control, but it seems to be at least illusotorily true.
Can I ask a question about?
Is that Larry?
about-
Yeah, go ahead.
That's Dean.
No, it's
I don't know, Dean. Can you?
How did I not? Did your camera freeze, Dean? That didn't sound
I
like
think
you
so.
and your mouth didn't
I
move.
think so. So, do you have any justification for denying the first person experience of free will?
Do I have any justification for denying the experience? No.
So
I don't
you
think so.
said it's at the very least
Yeah, no.
an
I don't think
illusion.
so.
So are you asking if he has reason to deny the validity of that experience or the veracity of that experience? Because by
It's
very
not an
nature, an
either or, it's
experience
I
is
think I'm getting at a both and here because
That's your favorite kind of.
for sure. So because I think I just think that there's some serious
Larry's in the man cave.
consequences. I think there's some serious consequences if choices are determined, I guess, depending on how you're
Oh, yeah.
defining determined.
Oh, absolutely. That's
I don't even think that framing makes sense. Like choices being determined seems to me to be oxymoronic.
square
It
circle.
would
my
be-
friend.
well,
Square circles.
actions. Yeah, actions.
It
being-
would be. That's poor
yeah.
wording on my part, but I guess I'm asking, is there any justification for denying that first person experience of
Denying the first person experience, and the
Of
only
choice, of
justification, the only justification that you could give to deny a personal experience is a greater collection of personal experiences to the contrary.
okay, do you have that
Uh,
with regards to free will?
And I don't think we have that. No.
Okay.
Like I said, I don't think I can. I by no means think that I could debunk free will or anything. Like I said, I just don't think. I don't think I have warrant to say I can show the difference between the two, between feeling like this is the case and it actually being the case.
Well, you don't have warrant to tell the difference between sharing a reality and actually sharing a reality either.
Oh yeah, that's true. Because I can't
So-
show that I can't show that I'm not in a brain in a vat.
Right.
But I have to also acknowledge what I'm capable of claiming and not.
But there's nothing about your sense experience that would cause you to defeat or would provide a defeater for your first person experience that you're not a brain in a vat is what I'm saying.
Is my experience enough to warrant me saying that I'm not?
I think that are certain
It's such a stupid conversation. I'm so sorry.
No, so
Like,
I'm laughing because I'm envisioning a preceptor watching this and just kind of being like, Yep, this is what happens when you don't presuppose God.
Yeah.
I mean,
So-
answer
Sorry,
the
that's
question.
my
You can
fault.
be brutally honest. Am I just way off base with my question?
So,
Sorry,
let,
Larry.
let me repeat the question. Make sure I'm getting it right. Is my personal experience sufficient to convince me that I am not a brain in a vat?
Right. So what
I
I'm
think
doesn't
so.
know.
here's what I'm getting at. Here's what I'm getting at. Whether it's free will, or brain in a vat. This is what I'm getting at.
Well,
I have, and I think everybody has sense experience that shows them or reveals to them, or however you want to technically word it, that that we all share an objective reality. And within that objective reality, I also have these intuitions and these sense experiences that lead me to believe that I have free will.
Yeah.
That lead me to believe that I'm not a brain in a vat. And what I'm
Right.
proposing is that unless there's a defeater that can be exposed to either one of those, then I have good reason to say that I'm not a brain in a vat.
Yeah, you have
and I
good reason
have
to.
free will.
You have good reason to say that. I can't. I guess this goes back to the whole like certainty thing. Like I can't just my personal experience alone can't give me certainty that I'm not.
So I guess my
If
my
you can't,
rejoinder.
wait, that's
What'd you say with
that's a statement of certainty that you can't be certain. So you can't
Larry
be
beat me
certain
to
that
it,
you
it's
can't
fine.
be certain.
That's my belief. I believe that I can't be certain.
So my rejoinder to that is I think certainty is, I don't put much stock in the goal of certainty. What I've been struggling to get a handle on lately is where people place that bar to where they'll say, you know what, I believe this and I'm comfortable just believing this. Because I found many people, like, I would say really if something is with a preponderance of evidence that just,
Right.
the majority of the evidence indicates something is true, then I say the rational thing to do is to believe that that thing is true. Some people, I would say, move that a little bit higher, that they're not comfortable with bare majority, that they're looking for something more conclusive, like beyond a reasonable doubt. And that even doesn't give you certainty because there are still possible doubts, but it gets you a lot closer to certainty. And I think part of this might come down to, it just doesn't bother me, because if I think just the bare majority of the evidence indicates something is true, I'm going to go with it.
Can I add a
think that's the
caveat?
reasonable thing. Sure.
I usually say that I'm looking for beyond the reasons of doubt that I'm aware of, because I can't actually be aware of all reasonable doubts. But if I'm aware of any doubts that are reasonable, I'm going to be much more hesitant to accept a conclusion if there is a reasonable doubt. But at such a time where I don't know any more reasonable doubts, I'm likely to accept that conclusion as near certainty as I can get. But I am actually accepting conclusions with majority evidence the most of the time.
Epistemology is a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, but that's exactly why
Very
I said, like I
concise,
said, like I said, Dean, I agree with you. I don't think I have reason to believe I am a brain in a vat. I'm just saying that I can't. I'm going along with certainty here. Like I can't show you that. I can't give you certainty. I can't be certain. Even my personal experience alone. Even my personal experience can't give me certainty.
I also can't be certain that you're not in Dean's basement right now. But that doesn't,
Right.
Like I don't like that seems to be off of the beaten path of the conversation, right? We're not.
Right.
I thought we said we weren't going to go to certainty because certainty is like not really useful in these sorts of conversations.
Are basements really a thing in North Carolina?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
Well, when dealing with the whole brain in a vat, that's exactly where certainty goes, is to that whole solipsist view anyway.
Well, but I guess maybe let me try and I don't know if I'm making sense with my point with regards to free will, and maybe I've convoluted it because I've brought in brain in a vat.
Yeah, we'll just do that.
Because
That was my fault.
no,
Via
it's okay.
Christian's question.
I guess my point is, and this is just a question for the crew, if I have sense experience that my cognitive faculties all the evidence points to the fact that my cognitive faculties are working well, and that my cognitive faculties are not jacked up. Why should I not trust my sense experiences when they fire, or however you want to phrase it, and I have this belief or feeling, or however you want to phrase that I have free will? Why
Dean,
should I not
you
trust-
literally have no choice but to trust your sense perception.
Huh?
You actually have no choice but to trust your sense perception. So the only time that you can change what you perceive is if your sense perception finds more reasons, which this is messy language, but finds more reasons to believe something else is true. So if you perceive that free will is how the world operates, I would say that and this is where we get into tougher language, right? I would say that you're almost justified from your own perspective believing that. But I would say that the way that you defeat that, the way that you would see that personal experience isn't reflective of an objective reality, is when that personal experience is tested against other people's or other parts of reality that may in fact inform your senses to a different conclusion.
Okay. So then my follow-up with that, and I guess I'm going along with Thomas Reed's simple seeing philosophy. So you said right there, Christian, that if it's tested up against somebody else's personal reality, is that the right phrase? And then that would cause me to
you juxtapose it to somebody else's personal reality who we're also confirming isn't like schizophrenic or crazy.
Okay. So
all right, so Jesus appearing to 500 at the same time.
Oh boy, here we go.
But we don't know his names though.
Larry just opened up a whole different can.
But they probably did.
But I mean, there was a doorway, and I mean, far be it for me not to kick my way through a doorway.
Yeah, if Jesus is seen by 500 people and they're all telling the same story, that's good evidence that Jesus existed.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to them.
Okay.
If someone
I
says
might
time
just pick
machine,
up a
I'm
little
kicking
bit
them
on-
in the teeth.
Hey, I guarantee you that'd be the first place that somebody goes if they invent one.
I would
I
go
might
to
just
the
pick up on
Cretaceous
something
Hold
period.
that Dean was
Aaron's
exploring.
You go
Aaron.
ahead, Aaron hasn't said anything yet. Please.
Sorry.
So it seems that if I'm tracking with what Dean is saying, so I've got an experience that I've got a desk in front of me, and that experience alone is not only sufficient, but it's actually really good evidence that there is actually a desk here. And in a similar way, we experience free will, so that not only gives us sufficient evidence, but actually really good evidence that I actually do have free will. So take another thing that we have an experience of, memory, right? If I have a memory of, 3 hours ago eating supper with my wife, but then, tomorrow I'm arrested for the murder of someone that took place at exactly that time that I was having dinner. And they didn't allow me to talk to my wife or anything. And they showed me all of this evidence. I probably would still believe that I was innocent, even though I had a lot of evidence to the contrary, simply because that first person experience is so powerful, just like this desk actually exists. And just like I believe I have free will. So unless we've got a really powerful reason to doubt the fact that we have free will,
And that's what I
we
tried to
are
say, Aaron.
well within our rights.
Yeah.
And I think
Right. That's exactly what I'm
Right,
getting at.
yeah, so I
just
think
need
we're
the
actually
younger generation to
irrational
verbalize
to
it for me,
disbelieve.
okay? That's my point. And I think
yeah,
that
I would
might
say that
be-
we're
if it's
irrational.
not the top reason, it's in the top 3 reasons to believe that free will exists.
I'm sorry, it is the top reason for me.
Oh, I think
it is the top reason.
I don't think we can get away from just the sheer pragmatism of it either.
Okay.
Because
So everybody go home and read Thomas Reed, and that's all I got.
You're
I have a
gonna
lot
have
of
to
books
send me a Thomas
read.
Reed book.
yeah, I've already my Amazon list is already, so I haven't paid for the other ones yet.
Okay,
so.
I'm just gonna buy everybody Thomas Reed.
I guess
Mine got
so-
so bad, John, that I had to break it down by topic to where I had a separate wish list per topic because it was just too cumbersome to scroll through.
You win.
really
I had
quickly.
I had 3 books come in 3 days, and my wife looked at me and she goes, "Is Amazon Prime like your own personal QVC?" And I was like,
I don't want to
Yes.
lose. I don't want
The
to
answer
lose.
to that question is
Christian,
yes.
QVC is a channel where people used to call in and order things off.
I know.
of
I've
TV.
watched Shark
Oh,
Tank.
okay, sorry. I'm just.
Like it's Lori Greiner, I think it is, who was the one of the original either investors or
I
creators.
was making an ageism joke.
I know, and it was not appreciated.
So Christian wants to be serious and talk to the point that Aaron is making.
Yes.
I know, because it's I think these are good conversations, right? So
Yes.
if we're saying like, and I agree with you that personal experience is perhaps the most, it's not only the most potent form of evidence, but it might be all that we have to experience the world around us. So what I would say is, if we have a personal experience of something that the rest of society isn't also experiencing, and I'm talking about someone who's like a paranoid schizophrenic, how could we then determine that when does personal experience become unreliable? Is it when people can test against it or testify against it? Or is it when that personal experience can be shown to not match the reality that we live in? Because that's where I think people who are determinists will say the feeling of free will is defeated by the measurement through objective reality.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure that I could really give you, here's the line, this is the number of things that we need in order to overturn personal experience. But, there certainly are cases where, maybe if you are a schizophrenic, or maybe you know that you have stayed up, 2 nights in a row and you're seeing some crazy stuff and you're thinking, okay, I've been awake for too long. That's probably hallucination, right? So there are certain conditions that are sufficient to overturn personal experience. But I'm
even
not sure
even on a
where
more
those-
serious note, like let's say a woman is convinced that she's been sexually assaulted, and in her personal experience tells her undoubtedly that it was someone who she knows, and we can prove through the rest of the evidence that we have that that person was in fact somewhere else. Do we have? I guess I'm just trying to juxtapose personal experience being all we have to our personal experience being potentially unreliable, and how we can parcel between what is reliable and what isn't reliable.
I think. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I'll point something out, and then it's all you, Dean. I might say in that situation, Christian, it might be that two people could have two different beliefs and both be rational. So the woman who really does believe that, it seems to me, would be, within her rational sensibilities to maintain that belief. But that we, as external observers who do not have her first person experience, would not be rational given the evidence to the contrary. So it could be that two people have, different beliefs and are yet both rational, or
Right, so
within their rational sensibilities.
So you're saying that even if she did have that personal experience, and then was shown that the person that she's claiming was somewhere else and it couldn't have been them, you say she's still rational in believing that it did happen?
Well, yeah, depending on just what kind of evidence they've presented to her. If they have a video camera and this guy's been wearing a GoPro for 5 years and, it documented his whole life, right? So, I mean, that would be tremendous evidence. And at that point, she should probably relinquish her belief in personal experience in that particular situation. But if it's a little more shaky, then, maybe things could be doctored. All I'm saying is it could potentially be that the evidence is not quite strong enough.
Or if she's incapable of relinquishing that personal experience, she may be within her justifications to continue believing it, because she can, in fact, not accept the new evidence in comparison to her personal experience.
Perhaps. I'm not sure about the feasibility of that, but not necessarily ruling
it wouldn't
out.
work on a macro level, but perhaps on an individual case-by-case basis, you could say someone is justified in believing that mainly because they're incapable of understanding or conceptualizing the contrary.
Well, I mean, think about it this way. Let's turn the ratio around between colored and colored blind. So I have the ability to see color, right? But let's say, Christian, you're the only one in the entire world that can see color. And you know that the screen behind you is green. I say it's gray. Everyone says it's gray. We can all see it's gray, but you can see it's green. I mean, I think you're perfectly justified in believing the wall's green, even though everyone disagrees with you. So, there's a lot of different situations that come in with personal experience and it seems to me in a lot of them, the person with the personal experience is rational to maintain their position simply based on personal experience in the absence of all contrary evidence.
Here's something. So let's say we have some
everybody.
Oh, with the destroyer himself.
I brought in the ring.
So here's something interesting. If everyone on Earth didn't see color and one person did, do you think that we could say that reality exists in such a way where color in fact does exist, because we can demonstrate that through color, the lighting and things like that, and actual the words escape me, but there's ways we can demonstrate color exists independent of just seeing it existing.
Right.
So But if you know everyone besides one person is not seeing color, does that perhaps suggest that a fundamental part of reality is the absence of seeing color?
Maybe I'm not sure what you mean by a fundamental part of reality. Like, what does that mean? A fundamental part of reality?
Yeah. So if would we agree that color is a part of reality?
In that situation, yes, it would be an
Yeah.
objective feature of reality.
Okay, because we can demonstrate that and things like that.
Well,
But-
not because we can demonstrate it, but because it actually exists. That's the thing that makes it objective. It actually
Sure,
existed.
yeah, it actually existing, and whether we can demonstrate or not, you're right. That was a mistake on my part. So it existing in reality, would we say that if no one can perceive it, is the only thing we can say about that is that it is a part of reality that nobody can perceive it, but that thing still exists?
Yeah, I mean,
Did we literally just pose the if a tree falls in the woods and nobody is there to hear it, does it make a sound?
Just
It
a
does
really
make a
fancy
sound,
way.
yeah.
right? Yeah, if something is a feature of reality and no one can perceive it, that doesn't mean that it's no longer a feature of reality. It
We go by the
still
objective.
exists.
Yeah, we go to the objective truth element there. Like that thing actually happened, whether someone perceived it or not. There's no subjective component. Just because there's no subjective perceiver doesn't mean it didn't actually happen.
Right, exactly. So I'm not sure how that tracks onto your question, Christian.
What do you got, Kenneth?
You got it. I was just spitballing.
I
So what
definitely
you're
missed
saying is
something.
my statement did make sense.
So Kenneth, just to
No, I don't like.
welcome to the stream, by the way. But just to catch you up, Dean was talking about free will and whether or not we're justified in believing that we have free will.
Right.
And so he made the comparison. So our experience of the physical world gives us not only good evidence, but really good evidence to think that the physical world actually exists. And said that in a similar way, we have very similar evidence, that first person perspective of free will. Therefore, we have really good evidence to think that we actually do have free will.
Okay. That I did. I sort of caught most of that when I was watching
Okay.
the stream.
This is
So
the part where he goes all lawyer on me.
no, I won't. I promise. So I think that the funny thing about free will is that our sense experiences do confirm free will as long as we don't think too hard about it. Because the more mindful that you are about your experiences of free will, the harder it is to maintain that illusion. And the way that I like to do a thought experiment with people on this,
Real quick. So are you saying that you think free will is an illusion?
yeah,
All
through
right.
no free will of my own, I would add.
So how,
The
Never mind,
the
go
thought
ahead.
experiment
gonna
that I
ask
would
this
run is the thought experiment that I would run is this: is I would say to anyone and everyone on the panel to think in your mind of any African American celebrity, whichever first one comes to mind. Just hold that in your head, and when you've got one, just let me know.
Whoopi Goldberg.
R.I.P.
Whoopi Goldberg.
Anybody who votes for
R.I.P.
Joe Biden.
Wakanda forever.
Who said Whoopi Goldberg?
That was Larry.
Thank you for that one.
Okay, so I'm aware that Whoopi Goldberg exists. I'm also aware that Denzel Washington exists, and that's the name that my brain gave me. And at no point in time was the option of Whoopi Goldberg aware to my conscious mind where it feels like I'm making decisions. Whoopi Goldberg was in there somewhere, but I was never free to choose it. The only thing that my brain gave me was Denzel. And I would imagine that the rest of you know who Denzel is, but you may not have ever had the freedom to choose Denzel because your brain gave you what it gave you based on a whole host of prior causes that were also outside of your control.
So
I don't mean to throw a
my
monkey
brain
wrench.
gave
Oh, go
me
ahead.
Beyonce, but I had the option to stop and think of Jay-Z instead.
Did that occur to you in that moment to stop and think of Jay-Z
Well,
when
yes.
Beyonce? So
Yes.
Beyonce came to you, and then at some point after Beyonce arrived in your mind, you had the conscious thought, I could have stopped and thought of Jay-Z, or I could now stop and think of Jay-Z.
Right. So this goes into the actual neuroscience data by Jeffrey Schwartz, where I can't remember if he's the one who actually conducted the testing or if it was just describing the testing, where okay, so people had this. You could hook up the electrodes to the brain and say, okay, pinpoint the moment when you decided to do something, and they could say, okay, well, the neurotransmitters were firing prior to that. However, then they also reran the test where it said, okay, pinpoint the moment where you decided not to do that thing. And what they actually found is that the decision to not do the thing came prior to the neurotransmitters to not do the thing. So you may not say you have free will, but minimally you have free won't, where you could stop something that is going in your head, going in your mind, and you can actually stop it and reverse it.
Now, are you talking about the difference in processing time between when the decision is made and when it appears in the conscious mind?
So that's where I would say there's just a fundamental lack of ability from just neuroscience alone to distinguish between the two, because you could have some sort of processing time where you can say one thing and then you have the observation from the electrodes. But
I don't have a serious thought.
Neuroscience is limited in that sense. It can't.
I don't have a serious thought. I just want to say, if Dean doesn't write a book called Free Won't, I'm going to hate him forever.
Well, this
You
is
got to
the
give
thing.
credit to Lucas for it, though.
Hold on 1 second.
I'll take
Larry's
an
only got
acknowledgement.
5 minutes, so we need to let him talk.
Yeah, go ahead, Larry.
I just wanted to say thanks for having me on the stream.
Oh, thank you.
I would say that my defeater to the determinist standpoint would be a Beatles song, "All You Need Is Love." Once you can show me how you determine love, I would be all ears. And you guys enjoy the rest of the conversation. I've got some sleeping to do in order
He just
to
pulled the
go
pin
and play some
tossed
golf in
it
the
right
morning.
there before he left.
So fine,
All
we can bid Larry
Adios, guys.
farewell.
I
and
already
I'm
don't
going
like
to-
the Beatles.
Bye, Larry.
Did John Anthony just say he didn't like
talk
the
to you
Beatles?
later.
I don't.
So I'm going to say to Kenneth, and this is one of those things where, so even if you could provide to me under a certain set of circumstances, you can limit my options. You can limit the choices from which I have to choose, to the point where maybe under this experiment, you limit them to specifically one choice, the choice that my brain gives me of Beyonce. That actually does not disprove my first person experience in my everyday life of making real choices. That is a contrived situation. So it's one of those things where when I say I have free will, I'm saying at some point, I sometimes can make free choices. Providing me with a counterexample of a time when I am not able to make a free choice does not disprove free will.
Well, but
generally.
you're only asserting that you're sometimes free to make choices. What I was doing is trying to use a really, really basic example of how, just by being mindful of how thoughts sort of spring into our mind from our subconscious, given an option where there's really no wrong answers. Any African American celebrity would do. You could Michael Jordan, Beyonce, Eddie Murphy, Denzel Washington. You could go on and on and on with your list of celebrities, but your brain's going to give you what it's going to give you, and at no point in time, when that first name springs out and your brain gives you Beyonce, there was never a moment in that interim between your brain giving you that first choice and the question being posed to you where you could make a decision in any meaningful sense. Your brain was going to give you what it was going to give you. And it just takes being mindful of that experience.
I wonder though, is there because like I said, I'm not totally disagreeing with you. I think it's a great example, honestly. But the only thing I see in that is, yes, I have the ability. My brain gives me what it gives me, but I have the choice to say which one I'm going to say.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Actually, John, you stole my point there. I was going to ask if maybe there's a relevant distinction between data retrieval and making a choice between the data that you've been given. So I actually like your choice. I chose Denzel as well. But my first thought was actually the one that just passed away recently. I can't remember his name, but
Chadwick Boseman.
Chadwick Boseman. So he was the first one that popped in my mind. And I was like, okay, well, I could describe that, or I could pick someone else. Let me just pick, Denzel. So, I mean, I've got the data retrieval, and that just kind of popped up. But I can still choose between the data that my brain's giving me. Maybe there's a relevant difference there.
So there's a distinction there without a difference. So when your brain gives you the thought, I'm actually going to choose Denzel, even that thought came from some prior causes in your subconscious mind that you didn't choose to have that impulse to pick a different name. The impulse came to you.
So what?
So you at that point, you're not free to choose the impulses that come to you. You're not free to choose which impulse is going to strike you as being more meaningful or compelling. Your brain quite simply gives you options, and at no point in time are you free to, in the sense that we would sort of colloquially refer to a choice. You are experiencing your brain. You feel like you're in the driver's seat, but you're essentially on autopilot.
That goes to
So again, all you've done is you've demonstrated that potentially the inputs that the inputs that go into my reasoning process may be determined by something, right?
Yes.
What that thing may be. It could be the physical brain. I would argue it potentially could be my, agent nature. That I'm 100% on board with. You may have missed this, or you may have been watching this, but I was fully willing to concede that our natures determine certain things. They determine a scope of options for us. But I can grant that the inputs may be determined, but what differentiates free will from a deterministic process is not the inputs. It is what happens to the inputs to lead to the output. And what you're making a leap, right? You're making a leap from saying the inputs were determined to therefore everything about the process must have been determined. And that is where the logic kind of breaks down, because it does not follow from the inputs being determined that the process we go through to choose a different celebrity or to say no celebrity at all.
But
that
the thing is,
that does not follow.
The distinction that you're making that frankly just doesn't exist. The inputs and the choice is made of inputs. There's an input that is going to lead to the final decision that leads to the words coming out of your mouth. So the inputs of Chadwick Boseman, no Denzel, and then another input comes in saying, I'm going to go with Denzel. That input came from somewhere. That input isn't something that Aaron chose to have. There was never a moment where he was like consciously willing those inputs to come into his conscious mind. They just arise. And you can't predict, and a number of neuroscientists I've heard say these words in more or less the same way. You can't predict what your next thought is going to be any more than you can predict the next words that are going to come out of my mouth. They just come. So you're not in charge of the inputs that lead to the options that are swirling on in your mind any more than you're in control of the inputs that lead to this decision point that you're referring to.
But my point is that a process is different from an input.
In what sense?
So, for example, if you think of like a computer program or a digital or an analog circuit, you have a logic gate, an AND gate, or an OR gate, an exclusive AND or exclusive OR, a NAND. I'm not an exclusive AND. You can have a NAND gate. These sorts of things in circuits do things to the inputs and produce outputs based on what they do. Now, that's a deterministic process.
Yeah, exactly.
That takes inputs and produces outputs. But the point is, regardless of the inputs, the output, or given a certain set of inputs, the outputs are going to be the same. And there's nothing that could have been different. Now, you could have asked me about this question yesterday, and I would have given a completely different answer, or could have given a completely different answer. The input of your question did not determine the answer of Beyonce. It did not determine anything.
The input of my question.
Well, it kind of did because it set up parameters. Like you couldn't have answered, Kenslet or something.
It's hard for me to believe.
The bigger question, Kenneth, is you need to understand that you're making a leap from saying, okay, you think you've demonstrated that an input may not have been or may have been determined. You have demonstrated that an input may have been determined. And what you think you've done is also demonstrated that everywhere between that input to the output was also determined. But that's not something you have demonstrated up to this point. So I would argue you've not even given me reason to doubt the freedom I had to go through a process of what I do with those inputs.
I'm not okay. So there's a distinction between me demonstrating that free will is an illusion and making some sort of demonstration of determinism. It could be the case that gnomes with free will are running your conscious mind, and they were able to respond fully with their free will to my questions in a way that's going to make sense to you. I mean, sure, we can go all day with the hypotheticals. The just when you said something like it's that I didn't demonstrate the, how do you put it? It doesn't matter. It's very
So
hard for me
when
to
we talk
believe
about free will, we're
that-
talking about the process of deliberation.
I understand
And
that.
what I think you're doing is you are assuming that there is no such thing as a process of deliberation.
That's not what I'm doing.
Okay.
It's that the process of what we experience as a process of deliberation is neurons firing, synapses doing their thing in a deterministic system. And we experience deliberation in a way that feels very meaningful to us. But that is the very illusion I'm talking about. I mean, the idea that my question to you about African-American celebrities didn't trigger a response of Beyonce in your brain, it's very hard for me to believe that if we would have just been sitting here in silence, that at that precise moment in time, that Beyonce would have just sprung into your mind. I mean, it's possible. I don't know how often you think about Beyonce, but...
Well, I was just saying that you could have asked me at a different time and it would have been a different celebrity.
Sure.
That was
Dean's
my point.
High-fiving, Dean's raising a thing.
Yeah, go ahead, Dean. No.
Dean got big palms.
Well, thank you. So, and you've probably heard this before. I'd like to get your reaction to it. You're a lawyer. Your Honor, I'm going to plead that my client couldn't have done anything else but what they did.
Yeah.
Has that ever worked in court?
It's funny you should say that. So my academic work in law school as a third-year student was all on this topic. I talked about developments in neuroscience and fMRI studies that undermine notions of free will, of libertarian free will, and the impact that would have on the ethics of sentencing policy in the United States in looking at federal sentencing guidelines. That's all very, very boring, and we don't need to put people to sleep on John's stream.
Can you email me your final product of that?
I could dig up my little academic paper.
Just we'll talk offline.
Sure. The short answer is no. In the same way that judges were not convinced by DNA evidence 30 years ago, they're lagging behind the science, and they find the idea that. Yeah.
So if science catches up, if judges catches up to science, and everything is determined, then they're not going to put anybody away for whatever it is, because after all, that's the only choice the client could have ever made.
I have thoughts on that.
The ethical question becomes whether or not a retributive model of justice makes sense ethically, or if we need to stick with more like rehabilitative models, restorative models of justice.
But either way, you're still putting somebody in a position where they are in some form or fashion paying a consequence for a decision that they couldn't have other likewise made.
It may not be you're paying a consequence for a decision, though. It may just be that this is just evolutionarily beneficial.
Well,
that's all we have. Because because if all we have if we have someone that's hurting others or killing people or something like that, or anything like that, violent crime, then we are, it's just pragmatic to separate those people from people who are not doing these things, because that way we have more chance to reproduce and propagate the species. It's just one of those things in our monkey brains that's telling us, hey, we can't have this going on. We have to figure out a way to.
There's also a distinction. I mean, just because someone isn't, in a libertarian sense, making these decisions doesn't mean that they're not an agent that is ultimately responsible for the things that they do. But
well, that would be my contention. How am I an agent that's responsible for the things that I do if I'm hardwired to simply do the things that I do?
Well, it's still your mind.
But I don't have a choice. You've just said I don't have a choice.
But
I'm hardwired the way that I am.
Before we answer that, John, I have a serious question. If we're all monkeys, then why are there still monkeys?
Oh my god!
I mean, checkmate.
We are the monkeys.
Checkmate there.
I mean,
we are.
I think that just defeated atheism, and I want a prize.
We're just less attractive monkeys.
This is what bothers me about the line of, well, the fact of providing a reason to then demonstrate to us that we ought to conclude that we do not have free will. And that is, once you obtain some sort of information that indicates to you that you do not have free will, right? Then that information indicates to you that you do not have a legitimate reasoning process that you can go by. Because there is no such reasoning process. Whatever happens, you are like the logic gate. An input determines an output. I can program a computer to say 2 + 2 = 5, no matter, anytime I plug in the input 2 + 2, it'll equal 5. And that is necessitated by the structure of the computer or the calculator or whatever you want to call it. So if you are trying to give me information that tells me that convinces me that I am like that I have no control over the reasoning process, well, then I can't even trust the process that I use to analyze that information you're giving me.
Oh, I see a small problem real quick. But you said if you're a computer and you're just programmed to think 2 + 2 = 5, if we integrate you with a million other computers that say 2 + 2 = 4, you're going to be able to test yourself against those computers, and you're going to see an error.
Well, there's an easier way around this. I mean, because the whole idea of measuring your reasoning against others can be a problem too. But could you, Lucas, through a conscious decision right now, choose to believe that 2 + 2 = 5? Are you free to do that?
Well, so this goes into the concept of doxastic voluntarism and indirect doxastic voluntarism, which I am not super well versed in, but I am aware that there is you may not be able to force yourself to will to believe certain things, but that doesn't mean you cannot will to make certain choices. You cannot will to do things.
Well, I would agree that like saying you're not free to, one doesn't necessarily, correlate with the other in terms of, if we're talking about free will, where those choices lie and everything. But I think that if we're talking about free will, then I think this math example is a really good one. If in your mind a conception of 2 and another conception of 2 adds up to 4, and we've established these values, I don't think you're in any way free to change that. So if we're talking about reason and an idea of free will and how that interrelates or correlates with our conception of reason, I think you're sort of bound by your perceptions when we're talking about anything related to free will.
Yeah,
John.
So,
do you see the chat?
Okay,
nice.
So I guess, and I don't know if I'm taking it way off base or not, if we're talking about free will and morality. Earlier, Kenneth, you said that I'm still a responsible agent. It seems to me the word responsibility to some degree implies free will or free choice. How can I be responsible for something that I am hardwired to do? So yeah, just I guess answer that.
Well,
question.
I mean, real quick, we do that all the time with other animals though. Like a dog bites you. The dog may not have made a conscious choice to bite you, it may just be what it does. But we still, take the dog away and, don't let it interact with people anymore.
But aren't we as how do I want to say this?
Well, we think we're like on a higher plane, but that's the thing I think we're talking about is that may be just us thinking we're special.
I would say it's kind of right down along those lines. I mean, if there's 7 billion of us in a system and we're all operating on whatever hardware and using whatever software we've got in our minds, if you do something, you did it. Even if the idea is, even if the sense of self is illusory, even if free will is confusing, it's still Dean doing the thing, and the rest of us in a society still have to cope with the effects of Dean doing a thing, even if Dean didn't necessarily have the freedom to do anything other than the thing given all the inputs.
Then even the concept of something like justice would be illusory too.
Well, no, Kenneth, would you correct me if I'm wrong, but you're just not you're not talking about punishment as synonymous with justice.
No, I'm not
justice
talking
is
about it
larger
either.
than
I'm
just
just saying-
punishing something.
I'm
or
saying
someone.
that even if they took me and removed me from society and put me on an island with a bunch of other people that were like me, that would still be a form of justice. But justice would be an illusion as well.
Well, I wouldn't say justice is an illusion. I would say that different notions of justice can be a problem given it, free will. I mean, if we have free will, if at any given time the murderer was free to choose to do something other than do the murder, then punishing that person makes sense. The idea of having a deterrence makes a lot of sense. But if we don't, then rehabilitating a person at all costs makes tons of sense. But this gets into really super interesting places of conversation. Like, what about your psychopath whose brain is, fundamentally, wired different than Dean's, and we can't rehabilitate a Charles Manson or a Jeffrey Dahmer.
Don't tell David Wood that. Don't tell David Wood that.
Hey.
Might I maybe try to give an example to clarify your position, Kenneth? So we could think of someone that had a chip implanted in their brain that caused them to go on a murder spree. They would not be morally responsible for their actions. Nevertheless, it would be pragmatic for us to find that person and lock him up until we could remove the chip or something to that effect. And so in that sense, there is not moral responsibility, but there is a pragmatic reason for us to lock that person.
Well, the place that this gets even more into the weeds is that our conceptions of morality are going to be different from a theist to an atheist. My idea of morality has everything to do with just human well-being and how people's actions impact each other. So if we're talking about moral responsibility in the sense of having an absolute lawgiver who condemns that person's actions, then no, there's no moral responsibility in that sense. But if we're talking about a person's actions having tangible effects on other people and needing to deal with the consequences of those actions, then they're still morally responsible. But the way that we interact with them would be much more like what John was saying about like an animal. I mean, your intuitions, if you get bit by a dog, are going to be different from if you get bit by a lady at the grocery store. It's a very different. I mean,
has that happened to you?
It's just a different feeling.
It did happen to him, but it was in a different scenario.
Even if we separate the notions of morality, right? Theistic, atheistic, whatever the case may be, let's just talk about moral responsibility in general. I think on either conception, right? So on the theist conception, the person has the chip. On an atheistic conception, the person has a chip.
Yeah.
In either scenario, does the person have any moral responsibility? Are they responsible for their actions?
I would say yes, and we can take the chip example to a sort of extreme. There was the guy years ago, the former Marine who climbed the bell tower at the college in Texas and shot all the people, and he had a tumor in his brain that was influencing his behavior. That would be a great example of a chip. Okay, whether or not we agree on the whole free will thing, we can say there was something influencing this guy's behavior where he wasn't himself. I would say that guy's still morally responsible for what he did as the agent who carried out the acts.
Can I make my example a little stronger then? Let's say the chip is connected to a remote control that I possess, and I can actually control the person, and I'm the one that forces him to raise his hand and pull the trigger. Mm-hmm. Is he responsible?
Well, in that instance, he would not be the one. I mean, he'd be an avatar for you in that sense, not necessarily the same thing in my mind.
Okay, well, I'm going to say, so instead of
you've introduced another agent there,
right? So instead of the controller or a controller that I'm holding, the controller is physical inputs. I don't know why it makes a difference if my thumbs are moving the triggers or if the wind and the TV show that he watched yesterday and the way that he grew up Like, why is it different if my thumbs are on the joystick as opposed to these physical inputs on the joystick?
See, and this is actually great. I'm glad you asked this, because now I'm having to confront where my intuitions could be off. So there is a distinction in my mind. I'm trying to figure out why. So, because what you're saying makes perfect sense to me. The idea of the other inputs, I would say the other inputs act sort of in the aggregate. There's no like central singular agent that feels responsible for me in that situation in the way that it would if there was like a guy with a chip controlling the other guy. If not for you acting on him in that situation, he wouldn't be doing those things. So in that sense, we could hold you responsible and not him. Whereas if we're talking about notions of justice, if we're just talking about a guy who's had stuff happen to him in his life shape who he is as a person that influences his decisions, there's nowhere for me to really place responsibility in that sense as conveniently as it would be to place it on you as a singular, sort of pilot in his mind. I think that's where the distinction is for me, is finding that seat of responsibility. If we're looking at like sort of global influences on a person and over the course of their entire life, I don't feel like there's a way for us to do justice in that situation.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly Dean's point, is if my thumb is on the joystick, I bear responsibility. But if the thumb on the joystick is just our lived experiences, these physical inputs, right? The way that we were brought up, the shows that we watch, the books we read,
right?
All these kinds of things. If those are the inputs, if that's the thumb on the joystick, then there just is no moral responsibility.
But there's an I in the situation. Whether the I doing the action is the guy with all the influences happening to him, or the I is you controlling the chip in his mind, there's an I to be held responsible.
Right. Well, you got the example of like the I don't know how many, I can't remember the exact names and situations, but the guy that walked into the bank with the bomb strapped to him around his neck, it was like a big collar or something. And it was found out later, this was placed on him by other people. He was forced to do this. And basically said they'll take the bomb off once he's done it, kind of thing. At that point, we're looking at that going, obviously, this is not him doing this.
Well, it's under duress, yeah.
Right, it is under duress. He's doing it. But we recognize the fact that there's an outside agent controlling that situation. And the way what makes it deterministic there is that would not have happened had the events prior to it not have happened, and that would have not have happened had the events prior to that not have happened.
So what I'm thinking of, and I'm not as nowhere near as informed on determinism and free will as I probably should be, but when you say it's considered to be under duress when the situation is in such a way to where you are not exerting conscious control over the material conditions that are being forced upon you, right? So if you walk into a bank and someone's strapped on a bomb collar to you, you wouldn't be held morally responsible in that scenario. But I wonder how that's different from in a deterministic world where the material conditions of the universe are like that collar. And yet in one instance, that person isn't held accountable. In the other instance, that person is held accountable.
Yeah, that just becomes pragmatic then, because when into the deterministic model, we would basically have to go back and lock up everyone you've ever had any interaction with, because we couldn't show which interactions or combination of interactions you've had that caused this chain of events.
Well, even if we're talking about positive things, I mean, I don't know why it is that I've got a brother, and we have drastically different life paths. Our values are very different. I really value, education in a way that he doesn't. And I don't know why that is. I don't know why when I got out of the Army, I really wanted to go to college. I never chose to want the things that I wanted. I wanted them, and then I pursued those things. But why didn't I want more to do something else? Why did I want to major in what I majored? I mean, these are all fairly mysterious to me. I could reason my way into having been like an engineering student, but I studied, literature. And so,
Well, I'd like to make a point about the dog scenario that was referenced. The only reason that the dog has done anything bad is because there's a moral agent that has imposed a standard on the dog. The dog doesn't know that it's doing something bad, right, good, or evil. Yet we would say that. So if you're making the connection that we are like the dog in this scenario, then I still don't see how we could impose any type of justice on somebody because they just are.
Well, so if there's
outside of pragmatism, but
yeah, well,
problems with pragmatism.
that may be it, because if we have dogs running around biting people, if the same dog has bitten 20 people, at what point, we have the ability to stop it, right? We have a solution for that. At what point are we not responsible for removing that dog?
Imposing that on the dog that just does what dogs do.
mm-hmm.
Right.
And so what the analogy then, what we're saying is, well, we're just like the dog. We're determined. We just do what we do.
But this becomes a question of what does justice look like for the dog. So if we're going to impose these rules, and the dog's going to do what the dog's going to do, and we're going to put and the dog exists in a world where we are like, dogs aren't supposed to bite people, and then the dog does what a dog sometimes does and bites somebody. Does justice for the dog mean locking it up forever with a bunch of other dogs that bite? Does it mean putting it down? Does it mean putting it in a position where it doesn't have the opportunity to bite people? Does it mean training it out of the behavior of biting people and making sure that it can reintegrate into life with humans and not be a risk to anybody? Then we start talking about what does it mean to actually have a justice system as opposed to just a sort of a punitive system.
I guess the point that I'm seeking to make is that even on determinism, as you have described it, I don't know how. I think you could say that morality changes, but I don't know how you would get something like progress. Yeah, we all seem to think that there is this thing called progress.
I just want to cut in because I got to hop off. So, great conversation. Kenneth, please send me your final paper, thesis, dissertation, whatever you called it in your law school.
Yeah, dig it up.
Yeah, I just before I leave, I would just like to say I think all of this is predicated on the assumption that determinism is true, and that what I'm struggling with is I've yet to see a principled way to justify a belief in determinism. Because
I agree. I can't really get out of determinism. I can't get out of free will. I really
like anything you grant, anything you give me is an appeal to a process that just logically cannot exist if determinism is true. Because I cannot reason. I have no choice for what to do with the information you give me if determinism is true, in which case I cannot actually reason with the information you give me if determinism is true. So it is logically impossible for me to reason to determinism. And that's where just like, if I want to accept determinism, I undercut any reason I have for believing determinism is true. And so that's where I'm just struggling with. And it's something that if you have something else in your back pocket that you would like to send me, that would be phenomenal so I could read it and process it. But as of right now, what my biggest struggle is how to justify determinism in the first place. Although what we do with determinism is also profoundly interesting.
I would just real quick. I would just say, like, to me, it seems like when we're newborns, we really don't have much ability to reason. It's a very base level reasoning, if you can even call it that. It gets better over time the more inputs we get from the outside world. So it doesn't really seem surprising to me that, once we get into, the longer we're here, the more some of us anyway, find more ability to reason, because we're just collecting more inputs, which means we're just collecting more things to juxtapose our own personal experience with.
Well, thank you guys. I'm heading out now, but I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for coming. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah. See you, Lucas.
See ya.
I was muted. Oh, that's a shame. I'm gonna let the smart people go back to talking and stuff. So.
You better get in here soon.
You are one of the smart people, Christian.
Absolutely.
Wrong.
Yeah, progress. I mean, the question of progress, Dean. I mean, it just becomes about, progress for who? What are our goals? I mean, the fact that we're all in this boat together, it seems to me that whether we're operating within a deterministic framework or not, we still should be striving toward a world where, where dogs are free to run around and not bite people.
Well, I think
of the dogs.
Yeah, I think.
But that's my struggle with determinism. If we don't have free will, then where do we?
But
where do we get these
isn't this the
ideas
goal?
of moral progress? We could say that it changes.
Yeah, but Dean,
it progresses.
Yeah, but Dean, wouldn't you see this in any species that values survival? You would eventually see, the longer the species is around, you would eventually see them getting better at surviving longer. And that's all we're talking about when we talk about moral progress.
Yeah, I think this comes back to the distinction between moral and pragmatic.
Right.
And I think the two are being conflated here.
It's pragmatic to be moral because morality leads to longer survival.
It might be my
right.
fault,
So if survival is our goal, then our certain moral conventions would be pragmatic, right? Obviously. But is there a reason to have the survival of the species as our goal? Is that itself a moral end?
It may be inherent in just living things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that, given a evolutionary naturalistic view, survival would be hardwired so that we would think that we ought to survive. Because if any living thing didn't think that it ought to survive, it would just die out, right?
And we wouldn't have to worry about it. So
right. So we're just hardwired to believe that we ought to survive. But in reality, that's just a hardwired belief we've got. It could have been different. It's not moral. It's just the way that we're wired.
Well, if we were hardwired to believe that we ought not to survive, we couldn't be having this conversation.
Exactly. Right. So therefore, it's reasonable to think that we would be hardwired to believe that.
I think existence is just, in fact, like existence of things entails the inherent will to survive.
No disagreement. The disagreement would come in whether or not that goal of survival is itself a moral end, or would it just be something that we've all agreed we want to do?
I think those two are linked. Those two would have to be, because if we're talking about morality in terms of well-being, then well-being leads to survival.
Yeah, that crucial word if well-being is moral, then absolutely. But is well-being a moral end? Is that the thing that is moral? Is that good, or is it just what we want?
So I think the problem is I have to transfer back into adult mode. I've been being a child for like the past 20 minutes. I think the problem is that it seems to me like if you accept well-being as a framework for morality, it's kind of like saying, let's play Candyland or let's play any particular board game you want to talk about. Once you accept it, then there is rules to the game that we can state. But what Aaron's pointing out, I think rather aptly, is that, well,
he was going to say chess, but he didn't want to sound too much like Matt Dillahunty.
That's the point, right? The point is to avoid a clone, right? And so I think the issue that he's pointing out and he's asking is, if I don't want to play Candyland, what if I want to play Chutes and Ladders? What stops me from wanting to play Chutes and Ladders?
Nothing.
And is there a moral difference between the two? Would it be better to play Candyland as opposed to Chutes and Ladders? Or in this case, would it be better, morally speaking, to promote the well-being of the human race? Or would it be better, morally speaking, to not promote the well-being of the human race?
The thing is we're playing Candyland. We're born playing Candyland.
Right. Even if we grant that everyone is playing Candyland, that wouldn't change the fact that playing Candyland is not moral. It's just something that we have all
Oh
agreed
yeah, it's
upon.
just what is.
Yeah, it's just a statement of fact. We are all playing Candyland. We are all wanting to promote our well-being. That's a statement of fact. But there's a very different question, which is, should we be playing Candyland? Is that the good thing for us to do? That would be the distinction.
I think there's a flaw in the analogy here. So if we're talking about life and humanity as being we're playing Candyland, then I'd say that morality and the idea of human flourishing, if human flourishing is the goal, say human flourishing is winning Candyland, then any activity that we do that gets us closer to winning Candyland would be analogous to moral behavior on the path to human flourishing. So if we were playing Candyland and we're trying to go toward the goal of winning Candyland, I think your question would really be more like, what if I wanted to move my position backwards in the game? Or if I wanted to move, do something that was completely against the rules of Candyland, will that get me any closer to winning Candyland? And if getting closer to winning Candyland is the goal, and moral behavior is then defined as anything that gets us within those parameters of rules of the game, of where we're going to get closer to the goal of winning Candyland, then that seems to me the way the moral discussion that the analogy would flesh out.
But
Maybe
I
a
have
little bit better.
question. So, do the people within the game of Candyland get to decide the rules of the game of Candyland?
No,
No, humanity made up the rules to the game of Candyland.
the physical facts of the universe are our rules to Candyland.
No. I would disagree with that. I would say that we as a species came up with the rules of Candyland, just like we came up with the rules of Candyland.
Well, we didn't come up with the rules that cutting off someone's head causes them to die.
No, but we made up the goals. We made up the game of societies and civilizations, and then
We can all,
we
we all agree that it's better to succeed than it is to fail at this game.
I think the key word that you introduced, Kenneth, is the word if. You said if well-being is the goal,
Right.
then all of these things fall into place. And I completely agree. But let me suggest, what if our goal, what if my goal is not to promote human well-being, but the well-being of, I don't know, sea turtles or polio, right? What if that's my goal?
Can you do that? Can you do that if you're dead?
Polio.
No, I can't do that if I'm dead.
So that if your goal is to promote the well-being of sea turtles, you would necessarily need to survive to do that, which would necessarily would necessitate your own well-being.
But if your goal,
no argument there.
Let me see if I'm with you, Aaron.
That's not Aaron's point.
If you were like, I want to make sure that sea turtles are taken care of, and as far as I can tell, human beings are the number one threat globally to sea turtles. So I'm going to get the launch codes and launch the nukes to save the sea turtles. I mean, yeah, I would say that you're operating outside of the game.
Right. Yes. That's the point, right? So if I think that humans are an impediment to the goal that I want to reach,
Right,
then the moral decision for me is to actually kill humans. So that's the distinction that I'm making, is
but then
I can change the goal.
I would say that's not a moral decision for you, because I don't think morality is something that is individually defined. I think that the idea is that we sort of collectively come up with goals, and then once we have those goals, there are objective ways that we can or cannot move closer to achieving those goals. So again, yeah, it is if the goal, and that's purely subjective, if the goal is
Super
we're gonna,
subjective.
what's that?
I was just doing Donald Trump saying super subjective.
It's super
Frankly, we've
tremendously
been looking at you.
subjective. Yeah, the goal that we collectively, subjectively come up with is that we want to get closer to human well-being. Then we can figure out from there objective ways to get there. But I mean, if we're talking about like a sort of like an is-ought type of question, then I'm totally floating in the breeze there with you. I don't know. Again, I don't think I ever made a conscious free will type decision to be like, I care about human flourishing.
Let me take a stab at this.
Stab
if
away.
I can, Kenneth.
Yes, stabber.
I'm gonna stab her good. All right. So Aaron, right?
Really
have you heard of Pavlov's hierarchy of needs?
I've heard of Pavlov, but not the hierarchy of needs.
So
You have
it's
the bells
basic.
and the dogs.
Yeah.
Different guy, but still. There's a conceptualization that in order to achieve X, there are some
Maslow.
fundamental things.
Maslow had the hierarchy. Pavlov had the dogs and the bell. I just
Getting it
have
mixed
to
up.
admit that.
It's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. We're talking about the same person. The hierarchy needs who made it isn't relevant. I mean, that goes in the face of the entire discussion. But let's just say who made it isn't relevant. There we go. So no one's getting the joke. It's fine, right? So you have a hierarchy of needs and a hierarchy of in the same way you have a hierarchy of goals, right? So if you say that your goal is to worship the Christian God, I would say there's a couple things about worshiping the Christian God that are actually things that you would have to set as a goal first, because you can't worship unless you're alive, and you can't worship unless you have the capacity to worship. You can't worship unless you have intelligibility, unless you have rationality. You cannot worship because you can't find God, right? So there's a couple things inside of the goal that are necessary to achieve the goal. So my argument would be, from a practical standpoint, that any goal that you give me necessitates some primary goals that, unless they are goals, you couldn't hold to the goals that you hold to. And I would say there's some underlying goals that need to be assented to, or those other secondary, tertiary goals wouldn't make a whole lot of sense in spite of the primary goals.
I like how Christians like, we're all precepts in a way.
Yeah, I mean,
we're all just one big precept family.
I mean,
I'm not sure the
implication. So how do you know anything?
That's right.
So Christian, maybe I'm not quite understanding the implications of what you're saying with this hierarchy of goals and needs.
So the implication would be this: while I do agree with you that the conceptualization of, why play Candyland, like let's say it's a matter of fact that playing Candyland is the rules of the universe. But let's say, for example, you were to say, I would like to worship the Christian God, or I would like to be a loving, caring person, or I would like to move people to Christ. These sorts of goals, while you may try to ground them in a sense of objectivity, at the end of the day are still only able to be fulfilled if there's other goals that are a little more axiomatic to your worldview. And I would say that those kind of irreconcilable axiomatic drives are what we would consider to be the primary is statements. Now, I take a weird position. I don't think oughts are possible in any worldview. In none, I think they're possible. So what I would say is we can say the universe is this way, and it is good to do something this way. That doesn't translate to ought, because ought has to call on a moral system that already exists. So it's edging on circular, right? Because if you ought to do something, we're calling to presuppositions you already have about the world. So I would say there's a problem with the conceptualization that morality or what we should do, bringing in oughts in any worldview, you're already confusing me. So I would just say there is goals that in order to do anything else, we have to follow those goals. The world doesn't make sense in spite of not following those goals. And one of those goals just happens to be that life is preferable to death, or that survivability is beneficial.
Is survivability being beneficial a presupposition?
So a presupposition is an unjustifiable claim that you take as a part of your worldview. And I would say that you can justify that survivability is in fact
something. I would say existence necessitates that. Because anything that exists, to have goals, you have to exist. So existence necessitates the will to keep existing.
Fair enough. I was trying to trap Christian.
Oh,
I know.
Sorry.
As soon as you started, I was like,
and this is why I go, like, people want to know, like, what is the foundational element of reality? I say it's existence.
Well, I guess my question. Sorry, does Aaron have anything, or I'll? Okay, so you would say something like this, Christian. You would say it is a good thing not to murder, but you wouldn't say we ought not murder.
Yeah, because when we say ought, we're trying to call on things that you already believe to compel you to adhere to those principles consistently. So if I were to say you do believe that the Bible is true, therefore you ought not murder, because that's a commandment, you ought to follow that. But if you didn't believe in the Bible, that ought statement doesn't make any sense. So what I would say is ought statements only make sense in light of other information we already assent to.
So let me ask you this question. do you think that it's well? Let me just throw it out there. What are your thoughts on? I used our sensory perceptions about the objective world. Do you think? What do you think about in the same that we have sensory perceptions about the objective reality of the world, that we would have moral sense perceptions as well? That
we
would
certainly have moral intuitions.
and so your response to that would be, well, intuitions can be mistaken severely.
That and or what is the case doesn't still bridge what ought to be the case. Because once again, ought is a word that specifically calls on a particular part of ethics. It's saying, when appealing to the rest of your worldview, this is what you ought to do. So ought statements in isolation don't make any sense, because you can't ought to do something if you don't already have a system of which you can compare the ought to.
So if I said, like, if you don't want to go to jail, you should not murder people.
Okay, you ought not murder someone if you don't want to go to jail, because we're trying to call on things you already assent to, that you don't want to go to jail.
Okay.
Okay,
So-
I mean, that would just be an agreement on a pragmatic interest, right? If you don't want to go to jail.
Yeah, in a sense, it would be exactly that, Aaron. And because you have, let's say, for example, you have 10 things you believe, and you want to introduce an 11th. The only way you could do that in an ought statement is to say, based on the other things in your worldview, you ought to do this, right? But that's not the same thing as saying it is wrong to murder, because saying something is wrong is just a call to what is objectively reality. And what is reality does not necessarily compel someone to comport to that, unless you make the argument that we are necessarily in comportion to reality, in which case you have this weird argument where things that are, if something is in reality, it must be moral, and I don't think that's true.
But if we're talking about
kinda
those
get caught up
pragmatic,
there.
if we're talking about those pragmatic judgments within the framework of well-being and conceptions of well-being, which people, I mean, obviously disagree on, that Christian may or may not agree with me, John may or may not agree with me, that when I say morality, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about those pragmatic decisions that have to be made when we're talking about how to achieve, maximal notions of well-being for people, and avoid harming people.
So on that, would either you or Christian or even John, would you guys say that there is no moral progress, just moral change? Since oughts,
No, there is moral progress, but
What's
whether or
the-
not you ought follow that moral progress, I
What's
would
the
have to know your
difference?
worldview.
I'm not sure what the difference is.
right? So I would argue that change is something that moral change simply means that it will just fluctuate based upon pragmatic agreements between people. Progress seems to smuggle in a standard there. So what I would
Yeah.
argue is that the difference between us and the Canaanites who worship Molech is that they burned children at the altar of Molech, and we have changed. Morality has changed in the sense that pragmatically it's not a good idea to do that.
Here,
But there's
Dean,
nothing objectively wrong about what they've done.
really quickly, right? So you say a phrase a lot, Dean, that I love, which is to live your worldview consistently. We talked about this a while ago. I think it was a couple of days ago where we said you should live your worldview consistently. So do you think that life is preferable to death?
Yeah, I believe that life is preferable to death.
Okay, awesome. So I now know a part of your worldview. I now know that you think life is preferable to death. What happens when somebody else murders you?
Well, depends on whether they were made a free moral choice or whether they were determined.
No, the physical consequences, not the ethical.
Oh, I die.
Physical consequences. You die. So that would reject the only statement you've given me about your worldview, which is that you think life is preferable to death. That rejects it. The idea that someone else would take that from you, that rejects your moral intuition there. Right?
So phrase that again.
It rejects, you would call that immoral for someone else to murder you because you find life preferable to death.
Okay.
Okay, good. That's the only thing I wanted to say.
I would say that for
I'm
moral,
trying to figure out how that impedes on anything that I've stated so far with regards to the
It
last.
doesn't. It wasn't relevant to what you said.
I'm thinking about what you're saying, Dean. So if I'm thinking about progress, I'm thinking about change. I'm thinking about Canaanites and Molech and sacrificing children. And the thing that occurred to me was, I feel like in our society we still do sacrifice children, but in just a sort of a different way. Because like
Me and Aaron would agree with that statement.
I have an iPhone. I have Nikes. I probably at somewhere in the chain there of getting the iPhone and the Nikes to me, there was probably some child labor. So there are children whose lives are being sacrificed in service to the corporate gods of, Apple products and sneakers. So I would say that in terms of moral change, we're lagging. But if we're talking about moral progress, I would say moral progress becomes possible when enough people feel like they can agree that having children sacrificed in any capacity is not conducive to those kids' well-being. If we can agree that kids working in sweatshops isn't a peak of human flourishing, and if we can move towards something that is better for those kids,
right. So
we got more progress. And as soon as you finish responding, Dean, I is sleepy, so I ought to.
Well, I'll let Aaron go because I talk too much anyway.
I was you reminded me of something. So when I gave the counterexample of me wanting to promote sea turtles, you said that wouldn't be a moral choice, right? If I chose to nuke everyone, that wouldn't be a moral choice because morality was something decided collectively. And you kind of just reiterated that again, right? Where it says, if we can agree that, having kids in sweatshops and stuff like that is bad, then it would be progress to get them out of those sweatshops. So I just want to make sure that I'm not misstating what you had said before. Is that correct?
You're not, but I should clarify. So when I talk about morality being, a collective thing, I mean, if I'm being really super duper precise, then making the decisions about what represents human flourishing are individual decisions. But if we're trying to make sense of it as a sort of global culture, as a species, to arrive at moral systems and influence the behavior of people, it takes more than like one guy caring a lot about sea turtles for anything really meaningful to happen in the real world. So that's where I sort of then speak in these broad terms, because I'm concerned with large scale human behavior.
Well, like I see this kind of, it doesn't surprise me that we all kind of human beings tend to agree on what is moral. It doesn't surprise me that we all agree with what we like and what we find moral any more than the fact that when we go to the grocery store, we don't see rocks next to the tomatoes because we don't want to eat rocks. We want to eat the tomatoes. And
right. And if there's one guy out there who's like, well, what if in my moral view, I like having chipped teeth, so I want to eat the
that's kind of what that analogy was. Of like if my morality says I want to kill all the humans to save turtles, that seems like the guy coming in going, where are the rocks? Why aren't there rocks next to the tomatoes for me to buy? Well, because we live in a society, and for the most part, no one eats rocks.
I personally enjoy rocks as a snack.
If we were to then make this a little more plausible, then let's say that the vast majority of the world's population agreed that a certain segment of humanity, because they had various characteristics or whatever, were not worth anything, and that we could use them however we wanted, or enslave them, kill them, whatever the case may be. If the vast majority of people agreed that would be better for the flourishing that we wanted to see, would that be a moral decision?
Well, the flourishing for who? Because the enslaved people probably wouldn't be flourishing.
Right. We would say that particular kind of human being is not worth.
Well, that's why it's called human flourishing, not just this kind of human flourishing.
Yeah, that's where that distinction would be.
So we couldn't disqualify any human and still call it moral.
I would argue that all humans are sort of protected under the umbrella of morality. But I'm operating within a humanist framework. So
right. I just didn't realize that you guys were pro-life. Sorry.
So totally.
I'm actually both pro-life and pro-choice.
That
I
doesn't
don't
seem
know.
possible, but okay.
Yeah.
It is. It's very possible.
I make a distinction between pro-life and pro-birth, but that's a whole other thorny topic. I think that a
I
good
hate
place for me
children.
to end on is that, well, there's something we can all agree on, right? Right, Dean? Right?
He
Kenneth
froze and I didn't catch it.
I never criticize the Old Testament for what it does to the Amalekites because I can't blame them. Those children are just terrible. I hate kids.
I think I'm going to end on this point. So I think nutrition is a perfect example, and the grocery store thing sort of jogged my mind about this. We might all have disagreements on what constitutes an optimal diet, but there's a clear distinction to be made between food and not food. You know what I mean? And I think in the same way we can look
Right.
at moral behavior and immoral behavior.
But on your worldview, Ken, if the guy that decides to eat rocks was already determined that he was going to eat rocks.
Yeah.
And he won't
That is
last.
true.
And he won't last
And he won't
long.
last long.
I'm
Yeah.
just messing
guy.
with Kenneth
Yeah,
before you.
he won't. He won't last long. He won't be much. He won't be part of the moral conversation very long at all.
No, he won't. But
Yeah.
Kenneth is going to miss this next part because I know he has to leave. But I'm curious, Dean. Do you think that sexual preference is a choice?
do I think that sexual preference is a choice?
Wow, the hard hitting questions.
Super loaded question. I think that as far as I understand in my worldview, I'm not going to deny that there are physical predispositions that can take place prior to birth for people to be gay or lesbian or trans. I think I think there is a part of that that's.
But could someone choose not to be?
Do what?
Could someone choose not to be?
Could someone choose not to be? I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
And
I'm just curious.
I can give you
See
an
that? Wow, that goes that. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead, but that completely because I feel like that's like we said earlier. Like I can't tell the difference between I feel and what is actually is. I feel like that's not even possible.
I think that there are orientations, and I think people can suppress those orientations.
Well, on that note, I'm going to dip out. Good night, everybody.
Thank you,
Bye,
Kenneth.
Kevin.
Thank you for being here.
I do think that people can suppress orientations for sure.
Yeah, but I don't think the question was like, for example, if you are heterosexual and you're attracted to women, you can in fact not date women and not have sex with women and suppress that sexuality. That doesn't make you any less heterosexual.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, like, if someone is homosexual, if they're attracted to someone of the same sex, can they choose to cease being attracted to that opposite sex?
I think that's a good question. I don't know enough about orientation, sex, and gender to make a definitive statement about that. I would say that if we're simply talking about, because I believe in free will, I think that someone as a heterosexual male, I think I could definitely make the choice to have sexual interactions with other men.
Well, that's different than being attracted to them, though.
Right. So if that's the case, I don't know if I could not or I could.
Yeah, because it totally feels like, I mean, what we talked about earlier, whether like what I asked earlier, whether it feels that we have free will, but I don't know a way out of, it feeling that way or it actually being the case. It definitely feels that I could not make that choice to be attracted to.
Here's my response to Christian. Let me put it this way. I think that I could be, and I don't know if this is answering your question or not. I think I could be in a position where I wasn't attracted to men and then be groomed to be attracted to men.
So would you be fourth? No, I'm not an asshole. I'm not going to ask that question.
No, I don't care. Ask it.
No, I was just going to say, like, if that's true, then would you prefer a world where we groomed homosexuals to no longer be homosexual?
Would I prefer that?
We believe it's a sin, so I would assume that you'd want to see a world where less people are sinning. So you would see, a world where we could use some sort of like soft belly what you fucking call it? Deconvert. What do you call it? Is it deconversion?
Gay conversion therapy?
Yeah, like conversion therapy or something
So
like that.
I would say this in response to that. I would say I think that first let me answer it in a more 30,000-foot view. I think first any relationship, any sexual relationship outside of marriage, just from Christian worldview, outside of marriage is sin. So that's whether or not a heterosexual male is sleeping around on his wife, or if he's just sleeping around, or anything like that. Number one. Number two, and I think this is where my inability to be, I guess, up to date, so to speak, on orientation, sex, and gender comes in. I don't think that I don't necessarily know that someone would go to hell for a specific orientation. I think someone goes to hell for the actions that they commit. Does that make sense?
So
Are-
do you
are
think that
thought
people
sins?
choose their do you think that people choose their orientation? I know I'm asking questions outside of your expertise, and I want to recognize that. So anyone
Yeah.
who watches later, don't like pin Dean for stuff he doesn't actually
Right.
have
Do
a
I
lot of
think that
research in.
people choose their orientation? I don't think that people choose their orientation, because I think part of one's orientation is a nature versus nurture thing.
So the last thing I'll ask on this, because I don't want to like nail it home. What I just want to ask is, if it is like let's say that it is the case that you don't choose your orientation,
Okay.
then there are some people who are predisposed with an urge to sin, and that urge, as far as we understand, is, or I shouldn't say as far as we understand, as far as I understand, isn't reversible. Like, I don't think conversion therapy works. I don't think that
Right.
you can stop someone's
So,
attraction to something else.
so here's the thing. I think we all have an orientation to sin, regardless of whether that would be a sexual orientation, or that would be lying, or that would be something else. I think we all have an orientation to sin, given my worldview. But with regards to what you're talking about, I think that one could be oriented to a specific a specific sexual orientation or sexual preference,
Yeah, but
to environment. Hold up, due to environment, nature, and nurture. And I still think that they could either, I don't know if I want to use the word suppress, but I'll use suppress that, or overcome that, because I think that I could provide examples of that taking place.
yeah, but the problem with that is, though, and under your worldview, with the lying and things like that, those are across the board. Whereas with
Right.
homosexual,
Well,
whereas with homosexuals, though, there's no, you said sex outside of marriage. It doesn't become not sin if they're married, right?
What do you mean?
Like if homosexuals get married, is that no longer sin if they have sex?
No, it would. What I mean to say is that every sexual act outside of marriage is sin.
So
Outside of
two homosexuals married would not be sin if they had sex.
it would be sin. It would be sin.
That's the problem, though. See, that's what I'm saying. You're saying that this sin right here is not across the board.
Right. So I gave a bad example. So let me put it this way. So say someone was predisposed at birth towards being extremely violent, more so than the average person. Right. That's not across the board. Not everybody is predisposed to being, I don't even know what the term would be for someone who is predisposed to be super duper angry all the time. That's not across the board. Right. In the same way that homosexuality isn't across the board. But someone could still either suppress that or overcome that, because we have examples of that. So for instance, I would say that David Wood would be a good example. David Wood is a self-proclaimed psychopath, right? Clinically a psychopath. Clinically has a severe problem with feeling empathy, right? That's not across the board. But I think we would see in demonstration of videos, interactions with other people, like his walk with Mike Lacona. He may be a psychopath, but he didn't just haul off and kill Mike Lacona.
No, but what I'm saying is that's under your worldview. This sin is there is an instantiation where this action would not be sin for other people. That would be sin for anybody if they did that. What you're talking about with David Wood, like if holding off and killing somebody would be sin for anyone.
Right. You're missing the distinction I'm trying to draw. What I'm trying to draw is the question that Christian asked is, can someone not do that? Right. Can someone who is of that orientation, can they not be that way? And what I'm saying is, I gave two bad examples of lying. Everybody lies. That's across the board. I grant you that. But
I said everybody could lie.
Huh?
Like everybody has the propensity, the capacity to lie.
Is across the board.
Right.
What I'm saying is, in the same way that homosexuality is not like across the board, right? In what you're talking about, so is being a psychopath. It's not across the board. Not everybody is a psychopath. Not everybody is a homosexual. And you're asking me, and to Christian's point, can somebody not be that way? Can someone not act in that orientation or in that predisposition? And I'm saying, yes, someone can, in the same way that a psychopath who is who is oriented or is predisposed to that nature can overcome that.
No. What I'm asking is, like, under your worldview, sexual intercourse can go from being a sin to not being a sin as long as you insert marriage. For heterosexuals only. Yes, it doesn't happen like it does. There's nothing that makes lying not lying if I insert something else.
Right, but once again, you're missing the distinction that I'm trying to make based on Christian's question. You're asking a totally different question.
Okay, then maybe I am.
Your question is, all right, is sexual intercourse outside of marriage a sin? I'm saying yes. You're saying, okay, well, what? And I said heterosexual marriage, and you're saying, well, what about homosexual marriage? And I'm saying, well, if the standard is heterosexual marriage with regards to the sexual relationship, and that's the only thing, then anything outside of heterosexual marriage would still be a sin. Whether that's with another man, whether that's with an animal, whether that's, across the board. So there are two questions that are being asked. One's by Christian about orientation, and you're asking about sexual intercourse between two homosexual people that are married, as opposed to heterosexual marriage.
Okay, but I guess that's kind of what I was getting to, is that if it's something that they suppress.
Now I said suppress or overcome. I don't know the terminology to use there.
Okay, but I guess it seems kind of strange to me that there's these things that are sin, but then you insert marriage, it becomes not sin, but not for this group of people.
Well,
when you have other sins like lying, lust, things like that.
That's the particular point I was trying to make, is that in the worldview of Christianity, yeah, you're right. There is a type of sex and a type of sexual interaction between people that certainly is sinful, even under the classification of marriage. And I would argue vehemently that the definition that you're using for marriage with regards to homosexuals would not be the same definition of marriage in the Christian worldview.
Well, I don't know, maybe, because you're going to say that under the Christian worldview, marriage is a spiritual thing, correct?
No, I would say that marriage defined on the Christian worldview is one man, one woman for life. You're taking that definition that has been around, and you're saying, well, we've altered this definition of marriage, and we're saying now it can be two people of the same sex, one man for life. The Christian worldview is one woman, one man for life. So there's two different definitions of marriage there.
So you still have this group of people who are basically permitted to do this and it not be a sin. There's other group of people who are now required to suppress it, and there is nothing they can do to change. Because if being a homosexual is not a choice, they would have to suppress that. Basically, I don't know how that would ever work anyway. But there ends up being no way for them to remedy that situation. And so, like Christian said, they are basically put in that position with no way out.
If I might just offer one other observation here. I know it's not a very practical observation, but it is nevertheless true. There is nothing in the Christian worldview that would prohibit two people that experienced same-sex attraction from getting married and that being pleasing in God's sight, insofar as one person is a man and one person is a woman, right? If a man and a woman who are both homosexual married, I mean, that would be permitted. Now, it's not a practical point, but the point that I'm making is it's not as though this one man, one woman union is inaccessible to homosexuals. It's just that homosexuals do not have the desire, or that it may even be repulsive to them to think about the idea of going into a heterosexual union. So it's not like we're saying homosexual people can't get married. It's just that they don't want to, insofar as the Bible is concerned.
Right. That would, because if the marriage is what removes, I'm talking about with marriage being what removes the sin aspect from the sexual intercourse, that wouldn't work anyway.
Okay.
Right. Yes. But then back to Dean's point, if we're talking about a psychopath, or there is some evidence that suggests that those that have alcoholism in their parentage are more susceptible to become alcoholics, so maybe a person has a disposition to, become an alcoholic. There's no good way to, become an alcoholic, right? So that person has that disposition. Nevertheless, they can never act on it. And I think in a similar way, it would be with the homosexual. They have this disposition, but they would just never be able to act on it.
Right, but I would say that.
Here's my example. Here would be my example of that. One, I mentioned David Wood and if David Wood ever watches this and he doesn't like it,
Well, he's admitted it, so he's fine.
Come talk to me. So there's also on the homosexual side of the equation, there is a guy by the name of Christopher Yuan. I don't know if you know who that is or not.
No.
And so Christopher Yuan came to Biola and he gave a talk on the fact that when he I hope that if I'm not categorizing this correctly, that he would contact me and let me know and give me the straight skinny on this. That prior to him being a Christian, he was a homosexual. He would say that he was oriented that way. And then he got caught dealing drugs, basically, was sent off to prison for a period of time, became a Christian, and now lives with that orientation as a homosexual, but does not act on that orientation. So he does have that orientation, but it's one of those things where he doesn't, I guess, he doesn't value the acting on that orientation over his Christianity. So it's not, I guess my point is, it's not that it's impossible for something like that to take place in principle. It just doesn't seem, from my vantage point, it seems like, and I'm not saying you particularly, maybe you do. It seems like the people on the other side of the aisle on this issue say that to do that is somehow and would be the equivalent of sacrilege, so to speak.
I may also just point out that those people that are, experiencing same-sex attraction, it's not like Christianity is singling them out and saying, no, you are not allowed to join in this thing we call marriage. There is another category of people that Christianity does not allow to marry. So if I divorced my wife for burning the toast, Christianity says that I cannot get married to anyone else. Now, because that divorce was illegitimate. So if I go through with that, then Jesus would say in Matthew 19, around verse 20 something, that I've now got to live in celibacy. So it's not like Christianity is expecting anything super hard for homosexuals that it's not expecting of someone else that finds themselves in that kind of position.
Okay. Well, like I said, that's I have some issues with it, but I will say this. I want to do this all again. I do. Sure. Thank you all for coming. Dean, thank you for steering everyone this way tonight. You were the captain tonight, and I so appreciate that.
Oh, over to your channel? Yeah.
Thank you so much. And
no problem, man.
I want to have everyone that was on here back again, all together or separately, either way. Aaron, if you could, Are you on Facebook at all or anything?
I am, yeah.
Friendly
Do you
neighborhood.
have a channel? Do you have a channel?
I just recently started a YouTube channel. Is
He's
that
gonna
what you're asking?
Yeah, I was gonna try to put everybody's links in the description of the video. That way,
Oh,
everybody
gotcha.
could go.
Well, I'm associated with the Daily Apologist as well, so feel free to just put me in there with Dean's.
All right.
Friendly neighborhood exegete.
Yes, that's the other YouTube
There
channel.
it
Is
is.
your friendly your neighborhood exegete.
Okay. Yeah, I want to find everybody. Yeah, I want to find everybody. Put in the description, and I want to stay in contact with you, and hopefully you can come back again, guys. I want to say that this is one of the best streams I've ever had or seen. I'm glad it took place on my channel, because I think what we showed, we had 6-7 people in at one time. There wasn't much over talking at all. If it was, it was incidental, and everyone got along so well. Thank y'all so much.
That was definitely fun. And I'm open for whoever sees this at some point in the future. If you think that I am super off on the topic that we just talked about with regards to gender, sex, orientation, not necessarily my wheelhouse, would love to be educated on it. Let me have a contact, or if John, if you want to talk about it sometime offline.
Yeah, we may do. Yeah, we may do another whole show on just that topic or something. I'd love to bring in some people who know, obviously, definitely more than me, have better perspective on that issue, because I definitely don't have much perspective on it. Being straight guy, I don't have any. I don't have any prior data to go by. I'm just going by what I've heard other people say in a sense, and that's not really a good position to come from. But like I said, guys, it warms my heart, because it's rare you see these kind of things with this many people, and it flows so smoothly, and y'all are the ones that made that possible. So I want to thank y'all. We're over a little over 3 hours now. So I don't want anybody just looking at the time and going, no way in hell am I watching that. So at 3 hours, I'm already going to be asking a lot of them anyway. But guys, I know y'all want to get some sleep eventually too. So thank y'all so much again. And guys, if you're watching this later, or if you have watched it, if you've joined us, thank you so much. And we'll see y'all next time.
All right,
Been
later,
a pleasure.